Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back way back more than 1,000 years to a world built on beauty poetry and the rustle of silk. You're floating now gently like a wisp of smoke from a carefully chosen incense, over a city laid out with mathematical precision, framed by mountains, shrouded in mist. Imagine a place where everyone's hair was perfectly black glossy, and impossibly long, where the concept of a bad hair day probably involved someone noticing the split ends from a discreet distance. We're going to glide through the most peaceful, most profoundly influential life of Lady Murasaki Shikibu, the legendary author of the tale of Genji. If you're hoping for dragon battles or swashbuckling heroes, you might need to adjust your expectations a little. This is a story of quiet observation, profound feeling, and literary genius blooming in an era that frankly probably would bore you to tears if you tried to survive there for a day without Wi-Fi. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, pop your location and the local time into the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're arriving in Heian-kyo, modern-day Kyoto, during the peaceful, if somewhat internally competitive Heian period, around the year 973 or 978. It's a gorgeous capital city designed like a perfectly symmetrical chessboard, and for Murasaki Shikibu, it's the only world she'll ever really know in terms of constant habitation. Her family, the Fujiwara, are prestigious, powerful even. But here's where it gets a little like navigating a very crowded, very posh family reunion. See, the Fujiwara weren't just a family, they were the family. For centuries, they married their daughters into the imperial line, effectively pulling the strings behind the silken curtains of the emperor's court. But Murasaki didn't belong to the main branch of this dynastic tree, the one that got to decide who was empress and which prince got exiled. Her branch, the Haka line of the northern Fujiwara clan, was more distinguished by its scholarly prowess than its political clout. Think of it as being related to the CEO of a huge conglomerate, but your specific family wing is in charge of, say, the highly respected but less profitable R&D department, consistently churning out brilliant patents nobody quite knows what to do with. Her father, Fujiwara no Tamatoki, was a minor official, yet an eminent scholar and poet fluent in Chinese and dedicated to his studies. This was no ordinary household. Books were cherished, verses recited, and intellect was as valued as fine robes. It's a crucial backdrop to understanding Murasaki's incredible mind because while the direct line to the emperor was reserved for certain Fujiwara daughters, her branch was about cultivating brilliance, especially in classical Chinese. Now, as for her name, you've probably heard her called Murasaki Shikibu, but here's a fun little historical mainstream fact that's not actually her given name. We don't know her birth name. Murasaki comes from a prominent character in her masterpiece, The Tale of Genji, which just tells you how incredibly famous that book became. Shikibu was a reference to her father's official government position, the Shikibu Sho or Bureau of Rights at court, as women were often identified by their male relatives' ranks, or much later their husbands. Imagine being so famous your family just starts calling you Doctor Who or Lady Harry Potter because your creation overshadows everything else. A testament to her influence, surely, but slightly inconvenient for the curious historian. You can almost smell the damp earth after a gentle spring rain, mingling with the faint exotic aroma of imported sandalwood burning in censers within the lacquered wooden houses of Heian-kyo. Life here for the gentle nobility wasn't about arduous labor or military conquests. It was about refining one's aesthetic sensibilities, appreciating the subtle changes in nature, and expressing every delicate emotion through poetry, calligraphy, and highly prescribed social rituals. Her family home, while not one of the grandest palaces adorned with golden phoenixes, would have been a calm, expansive dwelling, likely with sliding screens instead of solid walls, and views of private gardens carefully designed to mimic grand landscapes. The sounds were muted, the whisper of silks, as ladies glided past, the quiet clatter of wooden clogs on pathways, the distant echo of temple bells, and always the rhythmic brushstrokes of scholars copying texts. This tranquil atmosphere, devoid of the political upheavals or peasant rebellions that often punctuate other periods of Japanese history, created a perfect incubator for a mind as sensitive and observant as Murasaki's. Now a quirky, perhaps slightly strange detail about this period Heian aesthetics absolutely adored decay in a poetic sense. Think about that for a second. While today we try to fight off aging with expensive creams that promise you'll be a spring chicken well into your 70s. Back then, people celebrated the elegant decay of things, the ephemeral nature of beauty called mono no aware. An aged poem slip stained by time and rain, exquisite. A blossom past its prime, gracefully falling, deeply moving. This isn't to say they wanted their teeth to rot out, but they found beauty in the transience, which frankly makes a certain sense. Maybe you should try to appreciate your next fading bunch of flowers a bit more. It shows up in their poetry all the time, this quiet acceptance of impermanence, and it undoubtedly seeped into Murasaki's developing worldview, influencing her later observations on life, love, and loss. Historians still argue whether Murasaki Shikibu's unusually broad access to classical Chinese texts was a deliberate educational choice made by her father, or merely a consequence of him having no sons to inherit his academic library, thereby letting his gifted daughter dip her intellectual toes where they normally weren't allowed to splash. This question is central to understanding just how revolutionary her personal intellectual journey was from a very early age. Whatever the specific reasons, it was this intellectually rich yet politically quieter family environment that nurtured the nascent genius who would one day compose the world's first novel. She was surrounded by the legacy of scholars, by an air of intellectual curiosity, and by the hushed cadence of poetry, all within the elegant but highly constrained society of Heian-kyo, which you might notice offered few loud distractions. Peace indeed. So you're now firmly ensconced in this scholar's household in Heian-kyo, absorbing the intellectual hum that filled Murasaki's early life. But remember that subtle whisper from the last section about her unusual access to texts. Well, that whisper is about to become a full-on, slightly scandalous academic shout-out. For a girl in Heian, Japan, education was highly prescriptive, like a strict pre-kindergarten curriculum from a bygone era. Girls were typically taught rudimentary kana, the Japanese phonetic script, poetry, waka specifically, often loved poems for social maneuvering, music, calligraphy, etiquette, and perhaps some basics of Buddhism. Think of it as a finishing school with very elegant uniforms designed to produce graceful, cultured ladies perfect for aristocratic marriages. Or at least for elegantly fanning themselves while subtly critiquing others' waka. Chinese literature and philosophy. That was strictly a man's world. It was the language of government law, history, and official documents reserved for male courtiers climbing the career ladder, a kind of linguistic secret handshake for the political elite. But Murasaki, she just couldn't help herself. You see, her father, Fujiwara no Tamatoki, was a respected Chinese scholar. He'd read classic texts, like those of Confucius, Laozi, and Mencius, often out loud in their home, perhaps with his young son beside him. And there, quietly, unobtrusively, would sit little Murasaki like a human sponge, absorbing every character, every nuance, every profound philosophical concept. She was listening, truly listening, and understanding things far beyond what was expected of a young girl. In fact, a famous mainstream historical anecdote recounts her father's regretful observation that she was far more intelligent than her elder brother, remarking, "If only you were a boy." This wasn't a backhanded compliment. It was a genuine lament in a society where such prodigious intellectual gifts in a daughter were quite simply culturally inconvenient. She was a superbrain in a kimono which, while impressive, didn't exactly fit the expected social mold. Imagine you're eavesdropping now, perhaps from behind a folding screen, as her father instructs her brother. You'd hear the son struggle with a particularly complex Chinese character or a dense philosophical passage, and then a small voice, Murasaki's, would quietly provide the correct pronunciation, or worse, explain the underlying meaning in a way even her father found clearer. Now, as someone whose own brain tends to offer uninvited corrections during polite conversation, I can appreciate both her brilliance and the inherent social awkwardness. This wasn't merely rote memorization, it was deep intuitive comprehension. She wasn't just learning what the classics said, she was understanding why they mattered, grappling with their profound questions about human nature, governance, and the very structure of the universe. This unusual education wasn't just an academic pursuit, it was molding her very soul. This private, almost surreptitious education meant she couldn't flaunt her knowledge publicly. Imagine going to an elegant tea ceremony and casually dropping a profound quote from the records of the grand historian. You'd be met with polite, icy stares. Such knowledge was for male officials debating policy, not for women expected to compose delicate verses about moonlit plum blossoms. It's like secretly learning to code and becoming a programming prodigy in a society that thinks women can only knit. This societal constraint, this intellectual pressure cooker, must have had a profound effect. It meant she became an acute observer, developing an internal world rich with understanding but publicly demure. She learned the subtle art of withholding, of camouflaging her intellectual prowess behind layers of refined manners and appropriate feminine interests. This internal tension between her soaring intellect and the rigid expectations placed upon her gender likely sharpened her already keen observational skills, teaching her to look beyond the surface. One quirky tidbit about Chinese characters during this period in Japan: while men studied them rigorously for official use and composing poems in Chinese kanji, women predominantly used kana, the phonetic script derived from Chinese characters but simplified. Women's literary output, specifically kana literature like diaries and novels, was often dismissed as woman's hand, or onode, implying it was simpler, less serious, and certainly not on par with man's hand, or otokode, which used the more complex kanji. Yet ironically, it is precisely this woman's hand that gave birth to the novel form and many of Japan's most enduring literary treasures, including Murasaki's Genji. So while the boys were busy impressing each other with complicated brushstrokes, the girls were quietly inventing new ways to tell stories that resonated deeply with human emotion. This dichotomy between official male-dominated Chinese scholarship and private female-dominated Japanese literature was stark. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's fluency in Chinese, a language so politically charged, was considered a social advantage that she could subtly deploy, or if it was more of an intellectual burden, something she largely had to conceal in polite company. You can picture her participating in waka poetry contests, penning delicate verses about the seasons or the nuances of love, all while her mind perhaps was silently comparing her chosen words to the intricate patterns of classical Chinese poetry. It must have felt like speaking two different languages, one aloud and one deep within her own thoughts. Her mind was therefore being trained to connect the vast sweep of Chinese historical precedent and philosophical thought with the delicate ephemeral world of Heian court life. She wasn't just observing etiquette. She was perhaps asking herself why this particular gesture, this specific form of address, had evolved, pondering the social structures that supported it. She learned that external polish could mask inner turmoil, that exquisite beauty could hide profound sadness, and that the rigid adherence to form often concealed a delightful human mess. These forbidden studies didn't just give her intellectual tools. They gave her a unique lens through which to view the very society that both nurtured and constrained her. It was a foundation unknowingly for a future literary empire, built not on military conquest, but on the conquest of human hearts and minds through deeply insightful prose. She was quietly assembling the mental toolkit for a project so grand it would redefine storytelling forever, even as she gracefully fanned herself and debated the proper hue for a winter kimono. You've just witnessed Murasaki absorb knowledge like a superpowered sponge, her mind an internal library stocked with the classics, while outwardly she presented herself as a perfectly proper Heian noblewoman. Now let's see how that incredibly detailed inner world built on forbidden texts and a quick wit translated into her interactions with the real world around her. This intellectual grounding didn't just make her smart. It sharpened her focus, making her an unparalleled observer of courtly customs, and perhaps more importantly, the deliciously complex and often contradictory human foibles lurking beneath the elegant surface. Imagine her a young woman navigating the elaborate social labyrinth of Heian-kyo, a city where status was determined by lineage, aesthetic sensibility, and the ability to compose an impeccably tasteful poem at precisely the right moment. Etiquette was everything, a language as intricate as any written character. You wouldn't just walk into a room. You'd glide a rustle of silk signaling your approach, your layered kimono's junihito moving like clouds. Every gesture, every tilt of the head, every choice of color in one's attire spoke volumes. A particularly striking pattern might imply one's good taste, or the subtle insult one intended to deliver, kind of like someone showing up to a formal event wearing a perfectly tailored suit, but with brightly colored socks that loudly announce, "I'm secretly judging all of you." Murasaki wasn't just observing what people did. She was delving into the why. She saw the carefully constructed facade of courtly life, the dances, the ceremonies, the poetry contests, the meticulous arrangement of flowers for a special gathering, and understood them as elaborate performances designed to uphold a delicate social order. Her forbidden studies of Chinese philosophy and history provided a framework for understanding these human systems. Confucius, for instance, emphasized hierarchical relationships and social harmony concepts profoundly ingrained in Heian society. Murasaki likely saw the echoes of these ancient ideas in the present-day rituals, but she also saw the gaps, the inconsistencies, and the pure, messy human emotions bubbling just beneath the refined surface. Mainstream historical fact time. During the Heian period, communication between men and women of different social strata, even in the same noble family, was highly indirect and stylized. Screens fans and poetic exchanges were preferred over direct conversation. If a man admired a woman, he would typically send her a poem. Her reply, carefully penned and chosen, would signify her interest or lack thereof. Imagine trying to date in an app-free world where your entire relationship history is built on highly encrypted poetic verse, often delivered by a clumsy messenger. Murasaki lived in this world of subtle cues, and her keen mind would have picked up on every single unspoken implication, every hidden meaning in a carefully crafted turn of phrase. She wasn't just good at reading the room. She was good at reading the very air currents that carried a hidden message across the room. You can practically see her in your mind's eye now, perhaps observing a lavish gathering where ladies display their incredible fashion, their layered kimonos of vibrant silks perfectly harmonized. One lady might wear fewer layers than strict etiquette dictates, signaling either extreme wealth, because fabric was pricey, or an audacious sense of style. Murasaki would note this not just as a fashion choice, but as a personality revelation, a tiny rebellion or a declaration of self-assurance in a world of stifling conformity. She saw the social climbers desperate for a favorable impression, the gossips quietly, or not so quietly, dismantling reputations, and the lovelorn souls suffering in exquisite agony, their feelings poured into a single, perfectly imperfect poem. One quirky tidbit about Heian life and perception dental hygiene, shall we say, was not exactly advanced. While beauty standards for women involved incredibly long dark hair, plucked eyebrows drawn on with charcoal, and often blackened teeth using ohaguro, a solution of iron filings and vinegar, which was thought to preserve them and look more elegant, these elaborate beauty routines meant close-up conversation was perhaps best avoided. This perhaps made it easier for people to remain slightly enigmatic, their subtle expressions the primary conveyors of emotion without the distraction of, let's call it, dental diversity. Murasaki, ever the sharp observer, must have noticed this polite distance, this need to keep a certain visual harmony, and the ways in which human character shone through regardless of external enhancements or deterrents. Maybe this even fed into her understanding of internal monologues, given that much external expression was deliberately limited. Historians still debate whether Murasaki Shikibu's depiction of court society in the tale of Genji is a faithful historical record, or a highly romanticized or perhaps subtly satirical portrayal crafted through the lens of her specific Fujiwara clan experiences and her own philosophical leanings. It's hard to tell, isn't it, when an author is brilliant enough to embed multiple layers of meaning? Did she truly believe in the nobility of the Heian aristocracy, or was she gently poking fun at their preoccupations? The ambiguity only enhances her genius, allowing her to reveal universal human truths beneath the veneer of hyper-specific Heian customs. She watched relationships unfold, not the grand, passionate declarations of modern romance, but the carefully orchestrated poetic courtships, the secret rendezvous behind a folding screen, the despair of unrequited love, the boredom of an uninteresting marriage. And she saw the vanity, the pride, the jealousy, the melancholy, the yearning for recognition, the desire for genuine connection, all wrapped in layers of silk and obscured by polite smiles. These observations were the raw material for her art, the foundational bricks upon which she would build her epic. Think about a contemporary sitcom where all the characters are forced to communicate only through interpretive dance and coded emojis. That's Heian court life, basically, but with way better kimonos. Murasaki had an innate understanding of this dance, and she possessed the psychological insight to see through the polished surface, to the vulnerability and longing beneath. She didn't just notice the right fan or the elegant posture. She saw the human struggling within, trying to be good, to be loved, to find meaning in a world of prescribed forms. Her family's status, while not at the absolute apex, allowed her proximity to power and high society, yet afforded her enough distance to observe it dispassionately, like a social anthropologist studying a particularly ornate ant colony. She wasn't embroiled in every single drama, but close enough to gather all the juicy details and psychological nuance. This period, before she was called to court service herself, was like her advanced field training. She was compiling her mental database, noting the specific type of anguish felt by a rejected lover, the particular shade of arrogance worn by an overly confident official, the subtle flicker of understanding between two people who, despite all the societal rules, had somehow found genuine connection. Her peaceful observational life outside the inner sanctum of the imperial palace was precisely what allowed her to develop this nuanced, incredibly empathetic understanding of the human heart, an understanding that would later define her immortal work. You've seen Murasaki, her senses on high alert, soaking in the human drama around her like a sponge absorbing fine sake. Now let's widen the lens and immerse you in the very air she breathed, the city of Heian-kyo itself, a canvas of serene beauty and cultured rhythms quietly painting the colors of her spirit. It wasn't a city of roaring carts and crowded marketplaces like ancient Rome or bustling medieval European towns. Heian-kyo was laid out in a grid with wide boulevards, aristocratic residences separated by spacious gardens, and an abundance of green spaces. It was designed not for commerce or defense primarily, but for elegant living, for the gentle pursuit of aesthetic pleasure, and for the leisurely composition of poetry. Imagine you're there now. The primary sounds are muted: the whisper of wind through bamboo groves, the murmur of distant waterfalls from carefully designed gardens, the plink and thrum of koto strings from an open-air pavilion, perhaps the faint melancholy note of a flute carried on the evening breeze. You'd hear the soft shuffle of many-layered kimonos as ladies strolled through courtyards, the light patter of rain on cedar shingle roofs, or the distinctive click of wooden clogs on polished corridors. There's no traffic jam noise, no constant chatter of smartphones, just a peaceful, almost ASMR-like cadence to daily life. It's the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts unfurl unhurried like delicate paper lanterns drifting on a tranquil pond. The visual landscape was one of deliberate harmony. The houses were light structures of wood plaster and sliding paper screens, shoji often built around exquisitely cultivated gardens designed to capture the essence of natural landscapes in miniature. Ponds, carefully placed rocks, bridges, and seasonal flora like cherry blossoms, plum trees, maples, and chrysanthemums. Each element was there to evoke a mood, to provide inspiration for a poem, or simply to delight the eye. The changing seasons weren't just environmental shifts. They were profoundly meaningful aesthetic events, meticulously observed and celebrated. Cherry blossoms, fragile and fleeting, symbolized the impermanence of beauty, mono no aware, while autumn leaves offered a rich tapestry of reds and golds, inviting contemplation of the passage of time. If you spent all your time looking for beauty, your world tended to reflect it. Murasaki absorbed this cyclical appreciation, this profound connection to nature, shaping her ability to portray not just human emotions, but also the subtle dance between humanity and its environment in her narratives. Mainstream historical fact poetry was not merely a leisure activity in Heian society. It was an essential part of social interaction and a core measure of one's cultural sophistication. A carefully composed waka, a 31-syllable Japanese poem, could convey a marriage proposal, a political opinion, a declaration of love or disdain, or even a nuanced farewell. Competitions were common, judged by poetic skill, brushwork, and the quality of the paper itself. It's hard to imagine today sending a carefully composed sonnet to break up with someone, but back then it was just Tuesday. This rigorous literary environment honed Murasaki's innate talent, forcing her to consider every word choice, every subtle nuance in the precise way that only daily practice and intense cultural expectation can provide. Her observations were processed through a poetic lens, meaning even a casual glance at a willow tree could become imbued with 1,000 subtle associations. The daily routine for the aristocracy, Murasaki's milieu, involved elegant rituals. Mornings might begin with a leisurely awakening, followed by light meals, reading, or receiving visitors, perhaps behind screens to preserve decorum. Afternoons could be spent playing games like Go Writing Letters, often poetic exchanges, practicing music, or engaging in court ceremonies if one held a position. Evenings brought lantern light, and more poetry, perhaps incense burning or clandestine romantic assignations, all politely indirect, of course. It was a lifestyle built around the pursuit of refined pleasure, where beauty was the highest value, and crudeness, loudness, or obvious emotional display were deeply frowned upon. Which means that, ironically, all that pent-up passion and longing just found subtle, exquisitely crafted ways to leak out. One quirky tidbit: the Heian period was big on personalized scent. Nobles didn't just smell clean. They created their own unique perfumes by mixing fragrant wood spices and resins. They would scent their robes, their letters, even the air around them. Imagine, instead of a Tinder profile showing your best angles, your signature scent preceded you, telling people about your personal aesthetic and probably your financial status. Murasaki would have noticed this immediately. The delicate scent of a lover's sleeve as they passed by the stronger, more overtly masculine scent of a male official's attire, or the carefully cultivated aroma of an imperial procession. Scents became part of the silent communication, adding another layer of complexity to an already incredibly nuanced society, and no doubt enriching her mental palette for writing about interpersonal relations. It's not just about what you said, but how exquisitely your personal aroma declared your presence. Historians still argue whether this profound emphasis on aesthetic beauty and formal politeness in Heian-kyo inadvertently created a hothouse for deep emotional repression and unacknowledged longing, which Murasaki then masterfully tapped into for her narratives, or if the period was genuinely one of relatively contented intellectual and artistic pursuits, perhaps merely appearing to have hidden depths because of the cultural norms of polite restraint. Was it a cage of silk, or a paradise of refinement? Maybe it was both simultaneously. You can feel this tension perhaps in the way a subtle gesture could convey vast, unstated emotions, or how a single waka could speak volumes of yearning. This tranquil setting fostered a quiet, contemplative spirit in Murasaki. With no pressing needs for war or political intrigue, except perhaps within her own family's struggles for influence, which her specific branch generally avoided, her mind was free to explore the internal landscapes of the human heart. She saw not only the outer expressions of court life, but the intricate web of personal desires, hidden rivalries, and quiet moments of joy and despair. This was her reality, a city bathed in gentle light, steeped in artistic endeavor, and constantly breathing the subtle incense of unspoken feelings. It shaped her unique ability to observe life through a highly polished aesthetic lens, a quality that shines through in every line of her future masterpiece. She was growing up in a place that practically demanded you notice every petal falling, every shift in human expression, every exquisite, heartbreaking detail, creating an artist primed to render an entire world from such delicate observation. It wasn't just where she lived. It was how she learned to see. You've explored Heian-kyo's elegant pulse, seen its beauty seep into Murasaki's spirit. Now pull your consciousness closer, zoom into the very heart of that noble Fujiwara residence, and feel the hum of scholarly pursuit that shaped her nascent literary inclination. This wasn't just a house. It was an intellectual forge, constantly tempering minds with words and ideas. Her father, Fujiwara no Tamatoki, wasn't a politically dominant figure, the kind whose carriage might cause a diplomatic incident if he was late to a meeting. Instead, he was the embodiment of Heian intellectual refinement, a respected poet, a celebrated scholar deeply immersed in the classical Chinese texts that were the bedrock of aristocratic learning, and highly skilled in Japanese poetry, waka. Think of him as the humanities department head of the extended Fujiwara family, ensuring everyone was sufficiently learned and could at minimum write a passable haiku to ask for directions. This reverence for scholarship permeated every corner of their home. While other aristocratic households might have been consumed with the intricacies of political alliances or lavish fashion statements, the atmosphere in Murasaki's family home buzzed with a different kind of energy. The quiet rustle of parchment, the soft scrape of ink on paper, and the rhythmic recitation of poetry or classical prose. It was an environment where intelligence was the most valued currency, where literary discussion was as commonplace as dinner table gossip in a modern home, and where the gentle critique of a freshly penned waka was a far more significant event than, say, someone accidentally spilling tea on an expensive silk robe. It's easy to imagine her as a young girl perhaps peeking through sliding shoji screens as her father meticulously copied out a classic poem, his concentration palpable, the smell of freshly ground ink filling the air. Books, or rather bound scrolls and carefully copied manuscripts, weren't merely objects. They were living companions, their contents a constant source of wonder and discussion. This hands-on proximity to the tools of scholarship and the very act of literary creation profoundly influenced Murasaki. She wasn't just hearing about great literature. She was watching it being crafted, copied, studied, and debated right in her own home, making the transition from consumer of stories to creator of them feel utterly natural. Mainstream historical fact. Aristocratic families in Heian, Japan maintained extensive private libraries, and it was common practice for scholars to spend hours meticulously copying texts by hand, a crucial means of knowledge preservation before the advent of printing presses. These manuscripts were not only valuable for their content, but also admired for their calligraphy and artistry. This meant Murasaki would have been surrounded by these precious artifacts, likely watching her father or his scribes at work, experiencing firsthand the dedication required for literary pursuits. Imagine going to bed surrounded not by stuffed animals, but by actual scrolls of the Analects or collections of Kanshi poetry. Talk about literary immersion. Her father, unusual for his time, was reportedly pleased by his daughter's brilliance, even if he did famously lament that she hadn't been born a boy. This quiet approval, however tinged with societal expectation, was vital. It signaled to Murasaki that her intellectual curiosity, her uncanny knack for language and understanding, was something to be cultivated, not suppressed. She wasn't scolded for reading what was considered men's texts. Rather, she was indirectly encouraged. This permissive scholarly backdrop gave her the unusual freedom to indulge her curiosity to read voraciously, and to absorb knowledge from across disciplines that would have been off-limits to most noblewomen. It truly was an accidental sanctuary for genius. You might chuckle, but imagine the mild intellectual torture for her elder brother, who apparently struggled with his Chinese lessons, while his younger sister, overhearing from another room, would often chime in with the correct answers or elucidations. Poor guy probably felt like he was constantly being shown up by his baby sister's secret ninja intellect. No, Nobu-chan, it's not the poem of sad chickens, it's about the lament of lost purpose, basic Confucius. Her ability to understand profound texts seemingly without effort must have amazed her father, though perhaps exasperated her brother. This unique sibling dynamic further underlines the exceptional nature of Murasaki's intellectual environment. She wasn't just studying in her home. She was quietly outclassing everyone. Here's a quirky tidbit about writing. During the Heian period, the quality of paper was as important as the quality of the calligraphy or the poem itself. Fine paper, often exquisitely dyed with natural pigments, subtle greens from spring shoots, deep blues from indigo or delicate purples, and sometimes even scented with exotic perfumes, was an essential element of high-class correspondence and literary endeavors. Imagine sending a text where not only the message was meaningful, but the screen glowed a custom shade of lilac and a subtle lavender scent emanated from your phone. This extreme aestheticization of writing materials tells you how seriously every aspect of literary creation was taken. It made the act of reading and writing a truly sensory experience, grounding the abstract world of ideas in beautiful physical reality for Murasaki. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's prodigious early literary output, even before the tale of Genji began to take shape, was ever intended for a wider audience beyond her family or close intellectual circle, or if she primarily saw her writing as a personal pursuit, a way to process her observations and hone her craft. This quiet internal focus, born from the unique intellectual bubble of her scholarly home, probably laid the groundwork for her later masterpieces. Her home fostered not only her abilities, but also a certain contemplative disposition, a habit of internalizing and processing information, rather than immediately sharing it, which later became characteristic of her writing style. It was this blend of disciplined study, creative freedom within personal boundaries, and the pervasive appreciation for art and intellect that created the perfect petri dish for Murasaki's talent. She learned not just facts, but the nuances of expression, the subtle ways emotion could be woven into language, and the profound impact of storytelling. Her peaceful youth within this household, undisturbed by external demands or political anxieties, gave her the space to think, to observe, and most importantly, to write. The foundations of the world's first novel were being laid not in a grand court chamber, but in the quiet study of a dedicated scholar's home, illuminated by the flickering lamp of intellectual curiosity. Her very specific family lineage, respected but not dominant in the most glittering political circles, paradoxically granted her a different kind of wealth. The unburdened mind, free to absorb, synthesize, and create right there, nestled in the intellectual heart of Heian-kyo. You've seen her absorbing everything, a literary chameleon in her father's scholarly home, and now it's time to see the first visible sprouts of that absorbed wisdom. The natural progression from intense observation and a voracious appetite for classical texts in Heian-kyo's elegant poetic atmosphere was, of course, the act of writing. Murasaki's early forays weren't into grand prose yet, but into the beloved Heian art form poetry, specifically waka, the 31-syllable Japanese poem that was the heartbeat of courtly communication. These were her earliest artistic experiments, her first ventures into shaping language to convey feeling and thought, unequivocally hinting at the prodigious literary mind just beginning to stir. Imagine a world where your emotional vocabulary was largely confined to 5-line poems. Feeling deeply penna waka, bored penna waka, someone accidentally stepped on your fan. Definitely penna waka, one that implies the terrible rudeness of it all with elegant subtlety, of course. Murasaki's immersion in her scholarly family meant she was constantly exposed to poetic composition, recitation, and critique. It was less about whether you could write poetry, and more about how exquisitely and discerningly you did write it. It was the social currency, the Instagram caption, and the subtle diss track, all rolled into one demanding immense skill in brevity and nuance. She wasn't just learning to write waka, she was naturally excelling, her internal mental database already packed with the aesthetics of her environment, and the philosophical depth of Chinese classics provided an unparalleled foundation. When composing a poem about, say, a blossoming cherry tree, she wasn't merely describing petals. She was conveying the fleeting nature of beauty, the poignancy of transience, and perhaps even hinting at a historical parallel from some forgotten Tang Dynasty poem her father once read aloud. Her verses possessed an emotional resonance and an intellectual depth that set them apart. She was the kid in art class whose seemingly simple crayon drawing turned out to be an accidental masterpiece of surrealism. Mainstream historical fact collections of personal poetry Shikibu were a common feature of literary life in Heian, Japan. Courtiers, both male and female, meticulously collected their own poems, sometimes exchanging them as gifts or for social networking purposes. While Murasaki Shikibu's specific shikashu doesn't exist as a standalone, comprehensively preserved artifact, in the same way her talents are clear through the poems she inserted into the Tale of Genji and the Murasaki Shikibu diary. It's likely many more poems casually composed or exchanged on specific occasions simply disappeared over time like particularly elegant smoke signals. These early poems weren't just exercises. They were explorations of her own internal landscape, reflections on the human condition she was already so adept at observing. While seemingly constrained by the waka form's brevity, its strict syllabic structure 57577 actually forced a profound discipline in expression. Every word counted, every syllable was placed with intent. It was like crafting a miniature sculpture. Every curve, every angle had to serve the whole, suggesting vastly more than it explicitly showed. Imagine trying to explain your entire complicated feelings about someone with only 31 sounds. Murasaki was mastering this complex, emotional shorthand. A light joke here. If modern dating apps existed in Heian, Japan instead of bios profiles, would just have 3 perfect waka and a curated picture of your latest arrangement of flowers. Your opening line would be a beautifully calligraphed poem about the evening mist, to which your prospective partner would respond with an equally elegant veiled verse, indicating interest. Getting ghosted would simply mean a recipient failing to respond to your heartfelt meteorological verse, forcing you to conclude that your appreciation for the morning dew just wasn't doing it for them. Tragic, but incredibly stylish. Her environment naturally encouraged this. Picture an afternoon gathering with noble acquaintances. Someone might pluck a koto string, someone else might select a perfectly ripened persimmon, and then invariably a verse would be proposed, or a theme introduced. Murasaki would have participated in these impromptu poetic gatherings, perhaps demurely at first, then revealing glimpses of her sharp wit and emotional depth. These aren't bombastic declamations. These are quiet observations that penetrate the very heart of things. Her skill meant she didn't just meet the standards. She redefined them, pushing the boundaries of the form, enriching the existing traditions, with fresh perspectives born of her unique, somewhat secret education. Now a quirky tidbit related to poetic composition. Often these poems were written on beautifully patterned paper, chosen specifically to match the season, the theme, or the recipient's presumed taste. Sometimes a single verse was delicately painted onto a silk fan, a piece of clothing, or even a leaf, and then sent via messenger. Imagine not just a message, but the whole artifact of the message being part of its artistry and meaning. This fusion of literary content with physical aesthetics further refined Murasaki's artistic sensibilities, embedding in her mind the idea that true art wasn't just words, but an entire sensory experience. Her brain was already compiling this intricate aesthetic grammar that would later suffuse her epic work. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's early poems displayed an unusual degree of psychological insight and emotional complexity compared to other female poets of her era, or if our perception of them is simply biased by the immense shadow of her later novel, leading us to interpret her nascent talent as far more advanced than it was for her time. Either way, they stand as elegant precursors, little echoes of the emotional and observational power she would soon unleash on an unsuspecting literary world. This early proficiency was her apprenticeship. It taught her economy of language, the power of suggestion, the delicate balance between showing and telling. It honed her ability to capture a mood, an emotion, a passing thought, and encapsulate it perfectly. A poet, you see, has to compress a vast inner world into a tiny jewel of language. Murasaki was becoming a master jeweler. Her father's scholarly influence didn't just open books. It opened her mind to the endless possibilities of linguistic expression. Her calm Heian youth provided the time and space to practice to fail quietly and to eventually spectacularly succeed. She was developing her distinctive voice, a blend of refined elegance, psychological realism, and a deep melancholy for the ephemeral beauty of the world. Her poetic journey, while appearing to conform to the expectations of noble women, was in fact a deeply subversive one, slowly but surely accumulating the intellectual and artistic strength that would shatter existing literary forms. It wasn't about public fame. It was about the quiet, internal satisfaction of craftsmanship, the slow realization that one possessed an extraordinary ability to weave words into tapestries of meaning. The poetic garden of her youth was quietly tending to the roots of a majestic tree that would eventually bloom, bearing the unparalleled fruit of the tale of Genji. It seems she simply couldn't help being a genius. It was a peaceful, irresistible urge. You've just witnessed Murasaki's delicate fingers dance over brush and paper, sketching out poems that hinted at a mind beyond its years, a brilliant gem taking shape in the quiet confines of her family home. Now, as is the way of the Heian world, where lineage and carefully orchestrated unions were paramount, the gentle river of her life turned towards marriage. This wasn't a sudden, passionate whirlwind romance you'd see in a modern Netflix drama. No, it was a practical, quiet, and entirely conventional arrangement, one that provided her with a new kind of space, a domestic quiet that proved profoundly fertile ground for her burgeoning literary genius. She married Fujiwara no Nobutaka around 998 or 999 AD. He was a distant cousin, ensuring that comforting Fujiwara familial connection remained intact. But crucially, he was also from a less prominent branch, a fact that kept their household out of the dazzling, often cutthroat direct glare of imperial politics. He was also significantly older than Murasaki, reportedly in his late 30s, when she was in her early 20s, perhaps even early to mid-30s herself, as the precise date of her birth is still one of those little scholarly mysteries we'll just have to shrug at. This age gap meant a different dynamic than a youthful romance. Think of it less as a romantic movie and more as a harmonious chamber music piece, perhaps not always exciting, but deeply nuanced and richly textured. Nobutaka was a scholarly man himself, holding minor official positions, and just like Murasaki's father, was a noted poet. This shared intellectual background was frankly probably the best possible foundation for Murasaki, providing companionship and mutual respect without the emotional tempestuousness that might have diverted her inner world. It seems she exchanged the scholarly quiet of her father's library for a similar, if slightly more expansive, domestic version. You can envision their household. Mainstream historical fact about Heian marriage. While women did marry, the marriage was often uxorilical, meaning the husband came to live with the wife's family or continued to visit her regularly at her natal home. This was particularly common in aristocratic circles and allowed the wife to remain within the protection and support of her birth family. Murasaki continued to reside for a time at least in her childhood home, or a similar property attached to her family. This subtly implies that her daily rhythm might not have been dramatically altered from her premarital routines, continuing that gentle, observant pace. She wasn't whisked off to some entirely new, intimidating environment, but rather integrated this new marital role into her already peaceful and contemplative life. The disruption, such as it was, remained comfortably minimal. This domestic quiet was precious. It allowed Murasaki to continue her lifelong habits of keen observation, now expanded to include the intimate dynamics of marriage and the daily minutiae of running her own home, albeit with ample help because noble life. The growth during this period was quiet and internal. She wasn't composing grand speeches for the imperial court. She was meticulously refining her understanding of human nature, her eye for subtle detail, and her ability to articulate the often unspoken complexities of emotions and relationships. It was a private university for the heart, tucked away in the back of a serene Heian residence, funded by the gentle patronage of daily life. One quirky tidbit about Heian-era aristocratic weddings: after the main ceremonies, it was customary for the bride to send specific thank you poems and carefully chosen gifts to each of the important family members on the groom's side over several days. Imagine trying to coordinate that level of thank you notes after a large modern wedding where just picking out stationery feels like a marathon. It speaks volumes about the extreme attention paid to social rituals and expressions of gratitude, making every new social connection an art form in itself. And Murasaki, with her refined literary talent, no doubt excelled at these polite but essential post-wedding performances. I'm just picturing her writing out her best waka, thinking, Oh, Cousin Taru's poetic style really lends itself to that hint of existential dread. Perhaps the greatest gift of her marriage to Nobutaka was the lack of immediate, overwhelming demands. Unlike the intensely political marriages common in other Fujiwara branches, where a woman's main purpose might be to bear a male heir to the emperor and manipulate court factionalism, Murasaki's marriage afforded her the space for a life of dignified contemplation. While it's certainly true that Nobutaka would have had other wives and concubines, a commonplace practice in that era, one that wouldn't have been seen as a scandal, but simply social norm, Murasaki appears to have carved out a space of relative autonomy and intellectual pursuits within her specific domestic arrangements. You're not getting some dramatic, tearful reality TV love triangle here. It was all handled with elegant poetic subtlety, probably in verses carefully written on perfumed paper rather than shouting matches. A light joke, their domestic spats were probably so understated, they likely involved sending each other passive-aggressive poems about the withered flowers in the garden. Oh dear, the cyclamen is rather droopy, isn't it, darling, just like my spirit today. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's marital life, quiet as it was, might have deepened her psychological insights into heterosexual relationships and the challenges faced by women within the aristocratic male-dominated structures of the Heian period. Was she primarily an observer before marriage? Or did this experience enrich her capacity for empathy and understanding of nuances of shared life? Regardless, her capacity to perceive and articulate was growing, constantly adding layers to her understanding of humanity, much like a carefully wrapped gift, revealing new layers of beautiful paper. This quiet period allowed her observational eye, previously trained on larger social rituals, to now focus on the delicate micro-dramas of home life. She saw the nuances of intimacy, the subtle currents of affection, the shared routines, the quiet understanding or misunderstanding that blossoms or wilts between two people building a life. These aren't the sensational moments that make headlines. These are the tender, quiet revelations that illuminate the human heart. She continued her readings, her studies, her contemplative journeys through her own thoughts, and slowly, steadily, this deeper engagement with her personal reality and human relationships provided the foundation for a literary work unlike any other. This was the quiet brewing period where the delicate seeds of genius were sown into the rich soil of peaceful domestic existence, just waiting for the right moment to burst into glorious narrative bloom. Her life wasn't a thrilling novel in its outward events during this period, but it was preparing her to write one. You've witnessed Murasaki settling into her domestic life, a quiet stream flowing through the elegant landscape of Heian-kyo, perfecting her internal observation skills. Now feel the subtle shift in that flow, as her own little ripple appeared motherhood. This wasn't just a biological event. For Murasaki, having a daughter named Daini no Sanmi, whose actual name again is lost to us, so Daini no Sanmi refers to a later official title she held. Adding another layer of historical intrigue meant a whole new dimension of human experience unfolded within her serene household. It offered her intimate insights into parental love anxieties, hopes, and the delicate art of raising a young girl in a world governed by beauty, social standing, and complex poetic etiquette. You're now observing her not just as a scholarly observer, but as a nurturing presence. Think of the new sounds and sensations that would have permeated her once singular quiet. The gentle patter of small feet across polished wooden floors, the quiet gurgle of an infant, perhaps even the distant echo of a small musical laugh carried through the garden from where the nursemaids watched. These weren't disruptive noises. They were gentle symphonies of life, adding rich new chords to her observational orchestra. Her peaceful domestic routine, once centered on reading and personal reflection, now expanded to include the endless, loving preoccupations of a mother. Mainstream historical fact. For aristocratic women in Heian Japan, bearing children, especially daughters, was extremely important for family lineage and social standing. Daughters were often considered vital conduits through whom the family could establish or strengthen alliances with the imperial house or other powerful Fujiwara branches. A daughter with the right cultivation of manners, artistic talent, and perhaps a lucky connection could become a lady-in-waiting to an empress, and eventually, if destiny was kind, even become an empress consort herself. Murasaki's quiet joy in her daughter was likely tinged with the very real pressures and hopes for the child's future in such a socially stratified world. No helicopter parents back then, but definitely silk robe parents, subtly guiding their children's every brushstroke towards social success. Murasaki would have undertaken the delicate task of teaching her daughter the specific skills essential for a Heian noblewoman. Beautiful calligraphy, The intricate art of waka composition, musical accomplishments like playing the koto, and of course, the incredibly detailed rules of courtly etiquette. She wasn't just a teacher, she was an empathetic guide, a front-row observer to the development of a young person's character, their unique personality emerging from within the strictures of society. This direct involvement would give her invaluable insight into the psychology of children and adolescents, a perspective often missing in male-authored works of the time. One light joke here. Imagine Heian tiger moms weren't pushing calculus and advanced robotics. They were pushing flawless calligraphy and being able to perfectly differentiate between 50 shades of gray fabric for an outfit. The pressure to choose the correct poetic response for your childhood rival's passive-aggressive moon-viewing poem must have been intense. Daini-chan, you must select the verb that subtly implies eternal despair, but with a glimmer of dignified acceptance. The quiet anxieties of motherhood also found their way into her heart. The delicate health of children in a world without modern medicine, the precariousness of female lives subject to political whims and shifting court dynamics, the potential for heartbreak in a love affair, the challenges of arranged marriages. These weren't abstract concepts to her anymore. They were real concerns for the little hand she held. She was witnessing innocence bloom, knowing the societal currents that might shape or even constrain its future. This first-hand experience deepened her well of empathy, expanding her capacity to understand not just love between lovers, but the fierce, protective, sometimes sorrowful love of a parent. Here's a quirky tidbit related to high-end childcare. Naming conventions for aristocratic children could be quite indirect. Children were often simply referred to by their parents or even wet nurses' positions until they formally entered society. Furthermore, various rites and rituals surrounded childbirth, often involving specific charms, prayers, and sometimes even the physical relocation of the mother to ensure a safe delivery and ward off evil spirits. Imagine a baby shower involving mystical scrolls and specific auspicious angles of prayer instead of endless mountains of baby-sized clothes you'll use for 2 months. These traditions emphasize the sacred yet vulnerable nature of childhood and parenthood within the spiritual landscape of the time, all of which would subtly inform Murasaki's perspectives. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's status as a mother significantly differentiated her psychological portrayal of women and children in the tale of Genji from the way contemporary male authors might have approached similar themes. Was her motherhood a lens that uniquely magnified certain emotional truths? Or was she simply a singular genius capable of portraying human experience universally irrespective of her personal maternal status? Regardless, it's hard to imagine her writing with such profound empathy for the nuanced dilemmas of parenting and childhood without having lived through them herself. You see echoes of her gentle guidance in how fictional mothers protect their daughters, the profound sadness of children separated from parents, or the delicate maneuvering of a stepmother figure, all drawn from the rich tapestry of life she was weaving. This period also deepened her understanding of lineage and heritage. She now wasn't just a Fujiwara by birth. She was a Fujiwara continuing the line, instilling in her daughter the values and aspirations of her respected scholarly branch. She watched her child learn, make mistakes, develop her own small joys and sorrows, and in doing so saw a reflection of all human development, the endless striving for connection, recognition, and meaning within a given social fabric. Her daughter's questions about the world, her observations of small things, her youthful curiosity, all of this must have recalibrated Murasaki's own observational eye, reminding her of the freshness of a nascent mind encountering a complex world. A final light joke about Heian kids: their playground likely involved delicately arranged moss gardens with rules for tag involving strict adherence to poetic couplets for movement. I'm pursuing you, gentle deer, swift as autumn's falling leaves. Sounds less fun, but far more poetic. Murasaki's maternal experience wasn't a distraction from her intellectual pursuits. It was an expansion of them. It added a layer of profound personal wisdom to her already vast observational knowledge, preparing her to render not just the grand narratives of courtly life, but the intimate, often hidden dramas of the family and the self. This quiet unfolding of personal experience within her serene Heian life proved to be precisely the rich soil that would nurture the deepest roots of her monumental literary achievement. Her quiet domesticity and the joys and duties of motherhood served as an essential, perhaps even overlooked crucible in which the steel of her extraordinary genius was tempered and refined. The gentle hand that nurtured a child would soon compose a story that would nurture countless generations. You felt the quiet ripples of Murasaki's domestic life, The scholarly pursuits, the delicate balance of marriage, and the tender joys of motherhood, each layer adding depth to her already prodigious observational well. It's within this specific tapestry of peaceful existence, undisturbed by dramatic public events or the intense political maneuvering of the inner court, that the first subtle, almost imperceptible stirrings of the tale of Genji truly began to take shape. It wasn't a sudden flash of inspiration, more like the slow, steady development of a highly complex root system beneath the surface preparing for a grand, sprawling bloom. Imagine her in the quiet hours after her husband had retired, or during the tranquil afternoon lull when her daughter was napping. The Heian world valued idleness, not as laziness, but as a space for cultivation of mind, of art, of spiritual contemplation. This enforced leisure was for Murasaki, fertile ground, her mind already a repository of Chinese philosophy, Japanese poetry, and meticulously observed social dynamics, was restless. Perhaps a poem she composed for a specific occasion wouldn't quite capture the entire feeling. Perhaps a particular anecdote about a courtly figure wasn't detailed enough in her diary entries. The need for a broader canvas, a deeper dive into the interconnectedness of human experience began to make itself known. Mainstream historical fact. Before Murasaki Shikibu, there existed various forms of narrative prose in Japan, including court diaries, Nikki-bungaku fictional tales, monogatari, and poetic anthologies. However, these were typically shorter, more focused on specific events. Poetry or moralizing fables often lacking complex character development or an overarching continuous narrative arc. Murasaki's true innovation was taking elements from all of these and weaving them into something far grander, much longer, and intricately interconnected, what we now recognize as a novel. So she wasn't writing in a vacuum. She was building on existing traditions, quietly transforming them. Her initial efforts likely started as mere elaborations on existing literary forms, maybe private experiments with storytelling that went beyond the strictures of her Nikki diary or a simple monogatari. She was practicing perfecting her ability to connect scenes, to deepen character psychology, and to render the intricate web of relationships. It was during these solitary moments that Prince Genji, the Shining Prince, perhaps first materialized as a nebulous figure, an idealized embodiment of Heian aesthetic and aristocratic charm, into whom Murasaki could pour all her observations on beauty, melancholy, and human imperfection. You can picture her idly sketching out character profiles on small strips of paper, perhaps noting down conversations, or imagining scenarios for characters based on the real individuals she observed, the mundane elevated to the poetic. This nascent creativity, unlike her early forbidden studies, wasn't explicitly secret, but it was certainly private. She wasn't seeking publication in the modern sense. She was writing for her own internal necessity, perhaps to share with a small, trusted circle of literate women. Her family was peaceful, not constantly pushing political demands. This freedom from external pressure meant she could experiment, refine, and truly discover her unique narrative voice without the weight of expectations. It's like tinkering in a garage, not with cars, but with epic narratives, assembling pieces until a magnificent sprawling machine starts to hum. One light joke, she probably tried to name a character Sir Reginald Smells of Cedarwood and Old Sandals, but then thought better of it for the sake of epic flow. It's difficult to be the inventor of an entirely new genre, while maintaining impeccable aristocratic manners and never raising your voice, isn't it? Another on the same note. Imagine her needing to consult a character who's an emotional train wreck. Prince Genji, how would you respond if your dog ate your love letter? No. You must portray more exquisite anguish, almost as if your favorite plum blossom withered before its time. The subtle genesis also lay in her motherhood. Her experience raising her daughter likely spurred her reflections on legacy childhood, and the cyclical nature of human generations, themes deeply explored within Genji. She was witnessing the education and development of a young woman, internalizing the complexities of navigating Heian society from a fresh perspective, and understanding the hopes and constraints placed upon children from their very birth. This informed her deep understanding of human development, the kind of detailed psychological portrayal that was unprecedented in her era. Here's a quirky tidbit related to early narrative forms. Many earlier monogatari tales often lacked strong chronological progression, jumping around, or being essentially a series of loosely connected vignettes, with a strong emphasis on poetry interspersed throughout. Murasaki, building on this, perfected the technique of embedding waka seamlessly into her narrative, but her story maintains a much more linear, character-driven flow over a span of many decades. This evolution was not just about making a longer story, it was about creating a consistent developing world. Imagine inventing the concept of binge-watching a TV series instead of just standalone YouTube clips. That's her genius. Historians still argue whether the quiet isolation and personal contemplation offered by Murasaki's early domestic life were absolutely essential for her to conceive and begin such an ambitious multi-generational novel, or if her inherent genius would have simply found a way to manifest itself regardless of her circumstances. Would the bustle of the imperial court have suppressed such an intricate vision or merely diverted it? It's a chicken or egg question. Did the piece create the genius, or did the genius simply capitalize on the piece? It's impossible to know, but one can certainly sense that undisturbed quiet lending itself to long, sustained periods of creative thought. So in this peaceful, private phase of her life, Murasaki wasn't just existing. She was intensely feeling and processing. Her experiences observing the ebb and flow of courtly interaction, understanding the complexities of marital dynamics, navigating the profound emotions of parenthood, were not isolated incidents. They were quietly fermenting, connecting, inspiring her to imagine a protagonist, a whole world rich enough to contain these layered truths. The tale of Genji wasn't born from dramatic events, but from a deep internal well of cultivated observation and quiet empathy nurtured by the rhythms of her peaceful academic and domestic life. It started as gentle thoughts, quiet reflections, and tentative experiments. A literary garden planted and slowly growing. One carefully considered thought, one meticulously chosen character at a time. It's here, amidst the sounds of gentle laughter, the rustle of robes, and the aroma of incense, that the shining prince quietly first blinked into existence, a literary star waiting to rise. You've just watched the quiet germination of the tale of Genji, within Murasaki's peaceful domestic sphere, nurturing her understanding of human nature. But life, even a serenely structured Heian one, always involves the ebb and flow, the profound presence and inevitable absence. Around 1001, Murasaki's quiet life took a solemn turn. Her husband Fujiwara no Nobutaka passed away. This was not a sudden earth-shattering event of tragedy as we might understand it in modern dramatic narratives, but rather a dignified sorrow that opened up a new intense period of contemplation, ultimately channeling her profound sensitivity even more deeply into her literary project. You can sense the change in atmosphere. The soft clatter of his personal possessions being put away, the hush of mourners, discreetly of course, probably whispering elegies on rice paper. Grief in Heian society was expressed but often through formalized rituals and poetic lament rather than loud, uncontrolled wailing. Murasaki would have participated in the appropriate mourning ceremonies, adhering to the intricate customs of the time. The departure of her husband would have left an intimate, quiet void, particularly as she was left to care for their young daughter alone. This wasn't a sudden liberating event, but a new chapter in quiet solitude, a deeper dive into self. Mainstream historical fact: Heian mourning customs were extensive and prescribed. Widows often entered periods of strict seclusion, avoiding bright colors, meat, and active social engagement for many months or even years, depending on their closeness to the deceased and their personal inclination. During this period, the emphasis was on introspection, religious devotion, often to Buddhism, with its teachings on impermanence and remembrance. Imagine a social media blackout lasting not just a day, but an entire year where your only posts were melancholic poems to the heavens. This profound pause in social obligation allowed Murasaki an almost monastic quietude. This period of widowhood wasn't a creative hiatus for Murasaki. Quite the opposite. It was a crucible for deeper empathy and intellectual introspection. The themes of impermanence, mono no aware of loss, the delicate fragility of human connection, and the solace or lack thereof in spiritual pursuits, themes that run profoundly through the tale of Genji, were surely deepened and brought into sharper focus by her personal experience of sorrow. When she writes of her character's anguish, of the passing of seasons reflecting inner emotional states, or the way sorrow lingers long after a loved one is gone, you can sense the quiet authenticity drawn from her own experiences. It's the difference between hearing a sad song and singing it yourself after a broken heart. One light joke here: perhaps some Heian men saw widowhood as an opportunity for pouncing, sending hopeful poems across garden fences. Murasaki, now free from marital obligations, might have found this gentle romantic attention rather tiresome, likely responding with a delicately worded waka about how even the brightest moon hides behind clouds. Sorry, your exquisite yearning is lovely, but my current emotional state is black robes and deep contemplation, thanks for asking. This increased freedom from marital and social duties, a curious consequence of mourning, would have given her more undisturbed hours. Imagine the additional time. No longer bound by the need to accompany her husband to certain events or manage particular aspects of a marital home directly linked to his political or social calendar. This newfound time wasn't wasted. Instead, she could lose herself even more completely in her private studies and Buddhist texts, and critically in the expansive imaginary world that was already humming inside her. It became a profound period of artistic gestation, not of public declaration, but of private, relentless creation. She might have spent her days in secluded corners of her home, gazing out at the meticulously arranged garden, watching the rainfall, listening to the cry of migratory birds, each external observation resonating with an inner meditative calm. Her attention, always sharp, became even more finely tuned to the subtleties of inner life, the delicate architecture of emotions, the psychological intricacies of love and loss. She became a connoisseur of quiet suffering and elegant endurance. She could take characters already forming in her mind and invest them with a deeper psychological realism shaped by the lived experience of sorrow and the dignity of enduring it. Here's a quirky tidbit: during periods of intense mourning, it was common to simplify one's attire and even hairstyles drastically. Bright colors and elaborate hairstyles would be abandoned in favor of simple somber shades, especially dark gray-brown or undyed cloth, often with unbound or loosely tied hair. Imagine your no-makeup selfie becoming your everyday look for an entire year. This rejection of superficial aestheticism in dress reflected an internal focus, forcing a return to essential forms, mirroring perhaps the philosophical stripping away of life's transient joys to reveal core truths. Murasaki would have been cloaked, not just in fabric but in silence and internal focus, allowing her mind to wander through the depths of her emerging fictional universe. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's decision to write the tale of Genji itself might have been a form of literary consolation, a way to channel her personal grief and philosophical ponderings into a lasting work that explored the ephemeral nature of life and beauty. Was it a conscious act of artistic sublimation, or a creative urge simply reaching its full potential due to a combination of personal tragedy and opportune freedom? Regardless, her profound contemplative state surely provided fertile ground for the themes of melancholy mono, aware the pathos of things, and the fleeting nature of happiness that permeates Genji like a pervasive, elegant scent. The single constant in her life remained her beloved daughter. But Murasaki continued to oversee Daini no Sanmi's education and upbringing, finding purpose and continuity in nurturing the next generation. This focus provided an anchor, a quiet daily rhythm, even amidst personal loss, ensuring that life's precious details were never fully overshadowed by the larger shadows of grief. She wasn't consumed by sadness. She transcended it, folding it into the intricate layers of her artistic expression, creating prose that held the quiet power of profound emotional wisdom. In this peaceful, albeit melancholy space, the scaffolding of the tale of Genji grew more complex, the characters more richly defined, and the overarching themes became more deeply imbued with the nuances of human experience, born not from external grandiosity, but from internal rumination. Her home, now quieter, echoed with the unspoken questions of life and death, purpose and loss, which Murasaki transmuted into universal literary gold. She became a master of quiet profundity, her tranquil exterior hiding a mind teeming with vibrant fictional worlds colored by her recent experiences of both nurturing love and enduring loss. Her silent years of widowhood were not empty. They were being meticulously filled with words that would resonate for 1,000 years. You've watched Murasaki find a quiet, deep peace in her widowhood, turning sorrow into contemplative energy that fueled her growing narrative masterpiece. But the universe, it seems, had a subtle summons prepared for you, a quiet tap on the shoulder that pulled you back from your deeply cherished solitude. Around 1005 to 1007 CE, Murasaki Shikibu received an unexpected, yet undeniably prestigious invitation to join the imperial court of Empress Shoshi. This wasn't an abrupt dramatic twist, more like a stately, deliberate invitation that, while undoubtedly an honor, promised to upend your tranquil life. Imagine a formal messenger arriving at your peaceful residence, not a boisterous figure, but one draped in the finest silks, his voice soft but resonant. He carries an elegantly folded scroll tied with a silken cord, conveying the Empress's personal desire for your presence within her retinue. It's the kind of message that subtly shifts the entire atmosphere of your home, drawing you back from the secluded garden of your thoughts into the dazzling, sometimes blinding lights of society. You might sigh internally, a longing for your books and your quiet routines, but an imperial summons is less an offer and more a dignified command. It's an unspoken acknowledgement that your particular talents honed in elegant seclusion are now required in the most visible and influential salon of the land. This invitation was extended by Fujiwara no Michinaga, the undisputed political titan of the Heian period. Mainstream historical fact: Fujiwara no Michinaga was arguably the most powerful regent in Heian history. He held unprecedented influence manipulating court politics by marrying his daughters one after another into the imperial line as empresses and consorts. Empress Shoshi, also known as Akiko, was his second daughter to become an empress, and he meticulously curated her household not just with beautiful attendants, but with intellectually brilliant women who could enhance the empress's cultural standing and prestige. He effectively controlled the strings of the puppet emperors for decades, embodying an almost comical level of soft power dominance. This court? Oh, it's mostly just for showing off my impeccable taste in daughters, their ladies, and their pets, really. Why Murasaki specifically? Well, the whisper had traveled like the faintest scent of distant plum blossoms on the breeze about her extraordinary literary gifts. While the tale of Genji was certainly not completed yet, portions of it, particularly the early chapters, had likely begun circulating among a select privileged few. Her family, the scholarly branch of the Fujiwara, while not politically prominent, had always fostered intellectual brilliance. The news of her unusual erudition in Chinese classics and her profound skill in waka and nascent prose would have reached Michinaga's ears. He wasn't just collecting pretty faces for his daughter. He was gathering intellect, charisma, and creative fire, ensuring Empress Shoshi's court would be not just beautiful, but also the cultural vanguard. He sought out the equivalent of modern-day celebrity intellectuals or best-selling authors, all for the prestige of his favored daughter's cultural capital. Your new role was to be a lady-in-waiting. But in Heian Japan, this was far more sophisticated than simply attending to mundane tasks. Your duties would include offering elegant companionship, participating in elaborate poetry contests, contributing to literary gatherings, helping with the empress's correspondence, often poetic, maintaining cultural records, and essentially being an active, cultured participant in a glittering, competitive, and highly intelligent social sphere. Think of it as a permanent live-in think tank/glamour club. You'd be expected to converse brilliantly, compose exquisitely, and move with unparalleled grace, all while dressed in 12-layered silk kimonos that likely weighed as much as a small horse. No pressure, right? The contrast with your previous life would have been immediate. Your quiet home with its gardens and personal libraries gives way to the bustling, vast confines of the imperial palace. Here, everything is public, observed, commented upon. You move from relative solitude to constant presence within a group of highly refined, often very ambitious women. The air hums not just with poetic musings, but with the subtle undercurrents of courtly rivalries, veiled jealousies, and constant jockeying for imperial favor. It's like going from running your own quaint, independent bookstore to becoming a resident scholar in a celebrity mansion where everyone critiques your comma usage. A light joke here: I imagine your onboarding consisted less of HR paperwork and more of a quiz on how quickly you could compose a poem lamenting the slight imperfection of a moon-viewing banquet from across 3 separate folding screens, all while looking effortlessly nonchalant. You are now a part of the vibrant salon around Empress Shoshi, a hub of culture where some of the finest literary minds gathered. Here you would meet other celebrated women like Sei Shonagon, the author of The Pillow Book, a witty, acerbic collection of observations and anecdotes, though historians still debate if they ever met directly, due to her service to a rival empress. Imagine the ultimate Heian gossip circuit. Your previous observations of societal custom, once viewed from a respectful distance, were now a constant immersive reality. Every single detail of dress, deportment, conversation, and emotional display was magnified under the intense scrutiny of court life. It was a pressure cooker, but also a limitless source of rich first-hand material. Here's a quirky tidbit about Heian court fashion and its subtle messaging: the precise combination and layering of silk robes, junihito, and the visible hems of these layers were not just about beauty, but also about communicating rank wealth and sophisticated aesthetic taste. There were specific color combinations for seasons, events, and even social status. A lady's taste in clothing, especially the subtle harmony of colors glimpsed at the sleeve openings, could make or break her reputation among her peers and potential patrons. It's like knowing exactly which brand of phone case to buy, which brand of water to drink, and which podcast you subtly reference in conversation, all without saying a word. Murasaki, the sharp observer she was, would have instantly picked up on all these silent yet highly effective forms of communication. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's arrival at court, with her established literary talent and the developing Genji, fundamentally altered the dynamic of Empress Shoshi's already vibrant salon, making it more literature-focused, or if she was simply a brilliant addition to an already thriving literary environment. Was she a catalyst or simply a bright light among many? What is certain, however, is that this shift from peaceful seclusion to active court engagement provided Murasaki with an unprecedented opportunity for direct observation of the imperial family, the political elite, and the full range of human aspirations and vulnerabilities played out on the grandest stage of Heian society. The meticulous psychological details and the grand sweep of characters in Genji were undoubtedly nourished by this intense immersive experience. While a part of you might have longed for the quiet, scholarly life, the artistic opportunities at court were undeniable. You were now living within the very ecosystem you wished to portray, gaining access to details, conversations, and emotional dramas that no amount of removed observation could ever provide. The palace with its layered silks and hushed whispers was no longer just a place to imagine. It was where you awoke every morning, where your pen met the inkstone, and where the rich tapestry of Heian life unfolded in its most refined, sometimes absurd and always poignant detail. It was a trade-off, certainly, but for the author of Genji, it was an offer too valuable to refuse a quiet surrender to the very source of future inspiration. You've just been gracefully, or perhaps a little awkwardly if you're anything like me, installed into the inner sanctum of Empress Shoshi's court. The silks rustle more frequently here, the whispers carry greater weight, and every subtle glance is freighted with meaning. This transition from your peaceful, somewhat detached home life into the gilded cage of the imperial palace didn't just provide Murasaki with new scenery. It plunged her into an accelerated course on the nuanced psychology of power status and interpersonal dynamics at their most refined and sometimes most cutthroat. This is where her observational genius truly sharpened, transforming her already keen perceptions into surgical instruments for psychological analysis. Imagine your first few days. Every detail, no matter how small, becomes a data point. The way a senior lady-in-waiting chooses to arrange a spray of cherry blossoms in a vase, not just for beauty, but as a subtle display of authority or allegiance. The precise, almost choreographed bows between officials, their politeness thinly veiling complex political rivalries. The choice of ink for a letter, the quality of the paper, the specific cadence of a spoken phrase all transmit layers of meaning far beyond their superficial content. Murasaki wasn't just noting these surface details. She was constantly dissecting them, trying to understand the intricate social algorithms that governed every interaction. It's like watching a game of 4D chess played with elegant fans and exquisitely scented robes, where every player has multiple secret agendas. Mainstream historical fact. The Heian imperial court, particularly in its middle and late periods, was largely dominated by the Fujiwara clan. This dominance wasn't through military might, but through an intricate system of strategic marriages, patronage, and control over bureaucratic appointments. Young emperors were often married to Fujiwara daughters who would then give birth to the next emperor, ensuring a continuous cycle of Fujiwara influence as regents or chancellors for their youthful imperial grandsons. Murasaki herself was related to this powerful family structure, though, through a minor scholarly branch, giving her proximity without direct implication in its grand political schemes, allowing her to observe the mechanics with remarkable clarity. She got the VIP access without the full burden of participation. Her earlier readings in Chinese classics, those forbidden studies, suddenly become even more relevant. The sagas of power, the rise and fall of dynasties, the cunning of ministers, and the subtle arts of court intrigue described in ancient texts provided a framework for understanding the very real-time dramas unfolding around her. She could connect the macro-historical patterns of power to the micro-level politicking within the empress's living quarters. A lady-in-waiting's sly comment about another's poetic abilities wasn't just cattiness. It might be a subtle jab for favor, part of a larger, unseen struggle for influence. It's like reading Sun Tzu, and then applying it to a seemingly innocuous game of charades, suddenly seeing strategy in every move. You're watching her learn the rules of palace life, which are far more complex than any written code of etiquette. There's the omote, the public face, the refined facade everyone presents, and the yura, the hidden truth, the unspoken desires, rivalries, and anxieties. Murasaki, with her acutely perceptive mind, developed an extraordinary ability to see through the omote to the simmering yura beneath. The polite smile that hid contempt, the extravagant gift given for a self-serving purpose, the feigned illness used to avoid an unwanted social engagement. These became legible to her in ways they weren't to most. She wasn't fooled by appearances. She was captivated by the sheer ingenuity of people's efforts to project something other than their inner reality. A light joke here. If you complained about the food in Heian Court, you didn't just get a side-eye from the kitchen staff. You'd probably get a passive-aggressive poem in your breakfast tray, elegantly written, but effectively telling you that your discerning palate is apparently suffering from a temporary artistic blindness to true autumnal subtlety. You might find yourself subtly starving in your sleep for a month because everyone thinks you're culturally inept now. And if you borrowed someone's favorite fan and returned it slightly damaged, prepare for an entire month of exquisite poetic lamentation about the impermanence of beauty cruelly scarred by casual handling like a cherry blossom in an untimely squall, clearly addressed to you. Her observations extended to the male courtiers who visited the Empress's apartments, exchanging poems, conducting affairs, and gossiping just as much as the women. Murasaki witnessed firsthand the elaborate dances of flirtation and courtship, the complexities of polygamy, a mainstream historical reality for Heian aristocracy, and the emotional fallout of love affairs both requited and not. She saw how reputation was meticulously constructed and brutally dismantled. The elegant court wasn't just a backdrop for poetry. It was a psychological laboratory brimming with human aspirations and vulnerabilities. She saw gentlemen of unparalleled elegance behave with remarkable callousness. She saw ladies of refined beauty endure profound emotional pain. And she saw people striving for genuine connection in a world built on carefully managed appearances. One quirky tidbit about Heian-era sleeping arrangements in many aristocratic homes, and even parts of the palace bedrooms, weren't fixed rooms with permanent walls. Instead, they were created using portable screens, curtains, and hangings, effectively transforming spaces into private sleeping quarters each night. This means that sounds and movements could carry, and true privacy was much more of a flexible concept. This fluid environment meant people were constantly aware of others' proximity and movements, subtly fostering an even greater degree of awareness about appearances and discreet behavior. It's hard to have a genuine secret when everyone around you is potentially aware of every whisper. Imagine living in a constantly shifting open-plan office. This environmental factor undoubtedly amplified Murasaki's natural observational tendencies. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's experiences at Empress Shoshi's court fundamentally altered her perspective on Heian aristocracy, transforming a perhaps romanticized view into a more cynical, psychologically realistic one, or if her insightful nature meant she always understood the inherent flaws beneath the veneer of elegance, merely having her suspicions confirmed and details expanded upon. Did the palace make her disillusioned, or just incredibly well-informed? Regardless, her capacity to render characters with profound psychological depth revealing their hidden motives and subtle emotional states speaks to her having developed an unparalleled level of empathy and critical discernment during this immersive experience. This constant immersion, the perpetual need for discerning observation, became second nature. Murasaki, now less an outsider looking in, and more an intrinsic part of the sophisticated machinery of the court, began to truly understand its heartbeat, its hidden levers, its secret sorrows. Every social gathering, every formal ritual, every hushed conversation became grist for her already productive mill. The grand sweep of the tale of Genji, its meticulous character studies its portrayal of the interconnectedness of lives across generations, all gained immense richness and undeniable authenticity from Murasaki's peaceful yet penetrating insights gathered within the very heart of the Heian world. Her gentle life wasn't merely observing the polite ripples. She was feeling the powerful undercurrents. You've had your intense crash course in palace politics, seeing the omote and yura of Heian court life. Murasaki's observational powers growing sharper with each subtle glance. Now let's settle into the rhythms of that existence, into your peaceful routine, amidst the lavish, sometimes paradoxically isolating palace environment. Because even in the heart of power and refined culture, life settles into patterns, a serene rhythm that hums beneath the surface, allowing a contemplative mind like yours to flourish, or perhaps subtly isolate. Imagine your mornings at court. They begin early but gracefully. You're not waking to a blaring alarm. Perhaps the faint cries of birds from the meticulously tended imperial gardens, or the gentle shuffle of a servant arriving with warmed water for your morning toilette. Unlike the private expanse of your previous home here, You're surrounded by other ladies-in-waiting, albeit with prescribed spaces. While rooms in modern palaces are separate and walled, Heian palaces, much like grand private residences, used movable screens and curtains to define spaces. You would feel both the presence of others, and thanks to these delicate barriers, a certain defined personal space. You might use the earliest quiet hours for private reflection, for continuing work on your expanding narrative, the silent scratching of your brush on paper, your most intimate morning companion. The days unfold with a specific, beautiful cadence. Your duties as a lady-in-waiting aren't physically arduous, but intellectually demanding and socially intricate. You spend hours reading to Empress Shoshi not simple bedtime stories, but complex narratives or Buddhist sutras, your voice measured and melodious. You'd help her compose poetry, choosing precisely the right kanji for maximum subtle impact, selecting the perfect paper from a variety of delicate hues and textures, or overseeing the elaborate layering of her many kimonos junihido, each layer chosen to harmonize aesthetically with the season or the specific occasion. It's an art form in itself, the everyday presentation of imperial elegance. Think of it less as a job description and more as living a perfectly curated museum exhibit. Mainstream historical fact: Empress Shoshi maintained one of the most culturally vibrant and artistically significant salons in Heian history. Her father Mikinaga deliberately attracted talented women to her court, not only for companionship and service, but also to solidify her intellectual and artistic prestige within the competitive imperial family. This intentional gathering of literati provided a powerful stimulus for writing, making her office less of a simple domestic space and more of a buzzing cultural epicenter, much like a modern art gallery with live performance and very elegant tea parties. Murasaki wasn't alone in her brilliance. She was surrounded by it, inspiring a creative ecosystem. Midday might bring carefully arranged meals, delicate portions of rice, grilled fish, vegetables, and fruit presented on lacquered trays. But even dining is a performance. Quiet conversations, elegant gestures, careful adherence to protocols. Your peaceful moments, true deep calm, would likely be found in brief respites, gazing out at a serene pond within the palace grounds, observing the exquisite bloom of a lotus, or listening to the almost mournful song of cicadas on a summer afternoon. These little bursts of tranquility, interwoven with the grand flow of courtly life, nourished your creative spirit. It's in these moments that Prince Genji or his consorts would likely wander back into your mind's eye, becoming more real than the courtiers around you. A light joke: I imagine any new lady-in-waiting's biggest challenge wasn't composing poetry, but surviving the unspoken fashion critique. Oh, Lady So-and-so's inner silk hem is a shade too bright for the current autumnal poetic sensibility. She clearly hasn't mourned summer with appropriate depth. It's practically offensive. The pressure to be flawlessly attired and tastefully expressive must have been an Olympian sport. Or, for example, your polite, subtle snore during an evening poetic recitation. Its sleepy remember would instantly become the subject of 3 future waka poems, all subtly referencing the gentle rhythmic murmur of profound boredom. This brings us to the subtle isolation within the lavishness. Despite being surrounded by people, particularly other women, true unguarded intimacy could be rare. Every interaction was laced with societal expectation, delicate competition for favor, or careful observation of propriety. Imagine being part of a group of extremely talented, brilliant, but perpetually formal acquaintances. Conversations revolved around poetry, politics, or elegant gossip, but rarely touched upon the raw, messy truths of personal life outside the confines of an approved artistic lament. It's a paradox: total proximity without full personal connection. For an observer as astute as Murasaki, this cultivated emotional distance perhaps provided fuel for her analytical mind, pushing her to depict characters with inner lives that sharply contrasted with their public facades. One quirky tidbit: to avoid the summer heat, aristocratic ladies would often participate in firefly hunts during warm evenings. These weren't actual hunts. They were elegant strolls through the gardens where captured fireflies were released within finely woven mosquito nets or tiny delicate cages to create shimmering light displays in the dark, enjoyed along with moon viewing parties. Imagine creating living, sparkling decorations with insects just to elevate a dinner party. It speaks to the extreme lengths the Heian aristocracy went to in crafting aesthetic pleasure, transforming mundane life into performance art, and providing Murasaki with even more visually stunning if fleeting inspiration for her fantastical settings. The peaceful court routine could sometimes feel less like a dynamic, stimulating environment and more like a gentle, silken cage. The lack of major political crises that might affect Murasaki's family branch because Empress Shoshi was well supported by Michinaga allowed for consistent creative pursuit, yet it also meant a predictable flow. The outside world, with its farmers, merchants, or soldiers, rarely intruded on the palace's elegant rhythms. This sheltered existence, while perhaps stifling for a less focused mind, allowed Murasaki to create a detailed universe entirely independent of current events, spinning her stories within the bubble of her own thoughts. Historians still argue whether Murasaki, despite being celebrated for her literary prowess and favored by Empress Shoshi, might have felt an underlying intellectual loneliness at court, due to her unique, deeper scholarly background and the profundity of her creative vision, which may not have been fully grasped by all her peers. Was the peaceful routine a reflection of internal contentment, or an external shell she adeptly adopted, quietly processing vast emotions within her rich internal world? Perhaps it was this very intellectual isolation, this knowledge that she perceived the world on a deeper, more nuanced level, that enabled her to craft the tale of Genji with such unmatched psychological complexity. She wasn't simply observing the Heian world. She was dissecting its soul, one exquisitely peaceful, subtly isolating day at a time. The routine was a backdrop, allowing her the necessary internal space to create her entire imagined world. You've witnessed the intricate tapestry of your palace routine, how even in its predictable elegance a quiet space existed for your reflective mind. Now understand that this very existence within Empress Shoshi's inner circle didn't just sharpen your observations. It was the vibrant, endlessly fascinating hothouse where the tale of Genji truly blossomed into its breathtaking, sprawling form. What began as private contemplations and early experimental chapters within the peaceful confines of your earlier domestic life now expanded with unprecedented scope and detail, fed by the daily realities of court. Imagine the subtle alchemy at play. Your access to the Empress's refined world meant an endless supply of material, the nuanced jealousies between competing ladies-in-waiting, the exquisite pains of an unrequited courtship, conducted through delicate poems, the grand rituals of state that showcased the ultimate expressions of Heian power and beauty, the casual cruelty that could arise from absolute privilege, and the profound sadness that permeated even the most dazzling lives. Each interaction, each ceremonial gesture, each fleeting glance provided you with rich data points, immediately informing the lives of your fictional characters. You weren't just writing about the court. You were living within its very heartbeat, making your portrayals unbelievably authentic. Mainstream historical fact: the tale of Genji is considered the world's first novel in many literary traditions, due to its sustained complex narrative, psychological depth of its characters, and its continuity over several generations, encompassing themes like politics, love, aesthetics, and the impermanence of life. It's far more than a collection of short stories or a series of diary entries. It possesses a conscious literary structure that makes it an unparalleled achievement. Its sheer length, covering some 54 chapters, and the lives of multiple generations, would have demanded consistent dedication over many years. It was truly a magnum opus, probably started well before court, but profoundly shaped and brought to completion at court. Your private work on Genji was supported perhaps implicitly by the court environment. The very fact that literary accomplishment was prized meant you were allowed the leisure and the resources to pursue your creative endeavor. Unlike a commoner, or even a lower-ranking noble who might be burdened by more practical demands, your role as a lady-in-waiting in this highly cultivated setting permitted, even encouraged, intellectual and artistic pursuits. You weren't merely writing in stolen moments. You were granted hours within the palace itself to develop your elaborate story. Picture yourself working meticulously, perhaps in a secluded corner of your elegant chamber, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, the rhythmic breathing of other ladies in nearby compartments, serving as a strange sort of background hum for your creation. The story expanded chapter by chapter, growing organically. Characters became more intricate, their backstories deepening their emotional landscapes, becoming more vivid and layered. You would insert waka into the narrative, carefully composed poems exchanged between your fictional lovers or rivals, much as you observed being done daily at court. Your own exquisite skill in waka writing, refined since your youth, would make these poetic insertions seem utterly natural, serving to advance the plot or reveal character. It's like having a deep personal mastery of the subtle musical language of the court, allowing you to compose an entire opera of prose around its themes. The palace itself was a backdrop for many of the incidents you chronicled. The grand ceremonies you attended, the subtly orchestrated banquets, the quiet dramas playing out behind silken screens. These weren't just observed, they were integrated. The exquisite Heian fashion you were required to wear, the perfumes you encountered, the very specific way light fell on polished wood at dusk, all became details enriching Genji's world. This complete immersion allowed for a realism, a density of cultural detail that could not have been achieved had you remained sequestered from courtly life. One light joke here: imagine your fictional characters arguing. But Prince Genji, you must choose the light green outer robe to wear. A dusty brown today would indicate existential ennui, not sophisticated melancholic brooding. The fashion stakes were high even in your fictional world. Or when a real courtier acted a certain way, you might find yourself thinking, oh, he's definitely going to be the next discarded lover character. Right into chapter 12 with him. The court was essentially a giant ongoing research lab for human foibles, elegantly dressed and speaking in poetry. This is also the period during which parts of Genji began to circulate more widely among your peers and other high-ranking officials. It's likely Fujiwara, no Michinaga Empress Shoshi's ambitious father, deliberately promoted it as a jewel in his daughter's courtly crown. It became an object of quiet fascination, whispered about, perhaps copied by hand, of course, because printing was centuries away and shared among the select few. This initial reception, while perhaps intimidating, served as feedback, subtly influencing the direction of your grand narrative. It's the difference between writing only for yourself and slowly seeing your work take on a life beyond your chamber walls, gathering appreciative murmurs. Here's a quirky tidbit related to the distribution of Genji at court. It's believed that scribes, often women, were hired specifically to meticulously copy chapters of Genji as they were completed. These hand-copied manuscripts were incredibly valuable, both as literary works and as artifacts. Sometimes the paper itself would be highly decorated, colored, or perfumed. Imagine having an advance copy of a highly anticipated novel arrive not on an e-reader, but as a physically exquisite, one-of-a-kind scented scroll. This slow manual process meant the story circulated, gradually building anticipation with each new installment, perhaps even influencing your continuous editions, based on the reactions of those who consumed your prose in precious, bite-sized scrolls. This period of your court service, typically spanning some 8-10 years, marked the height of your novel's creation. Your unique status, a gifted writer brought into the elite world, not by marriage politics, but by intellectual reputation, provided both the environment and the insights necessary for such a sweeping work. The constant, elegant tension between your serene interior world and the external formality of court life created a rich dialectic. You observed the masks people wore, the roles they played, and simultaneously depicted the complex, vulnerable individuals struggling beneath them. Historians still argue whether the experience of observing Michinaga's court from the inside gave Murasaki a more cynical perspective on the Fujiwara clan's absolute power and influence, or whether her nuanced portrayals of political ambition and human frailty stemmed from an inherent psychological realism she possessed prior to entering court service. Did seeing the man behind the curtain inspire deeper critique or simply richer characterization? The debate continues, but it's clear her access provided layers of realism, infusing Genji with an undeniable truthfulness about human experience at its most refined, its most manipulative, and its most vulnerable. In sum, your life at court, far from being a creative distraction, proved to be the ultimate workshop. You meticulously wove your real-life observations, your deepening understanding of human character, and your mastery of literary forms into the continually unfolding tapestry of the tale of Genji. Each courtier you observed, each poem, exchanged, each fleeting moment of beauty or sadness you witnessed, became a stitch in the grand narrative. Your serene courtly life wasn't just peaceful, it was meticulously productive, 1,000 words turning into 100,000, 1,000 pages, the ultimate expression of your genius taking perfect quiet shape under the very elegant roof that housed an empire. You've plunged deep into the creation of the tale of Genji, witnessing its narrative bloom under the fertile sun of court life. Now let's peel back the layers of that bloom and truly see how the dazzling, meticulously choreographed tapestry of high-end fashion arts and daily rituals wasn't just a backdrop for your masterpiece, but was utterly woven into its very threads, giving Genji's world its unparalleled vividness and psychological realism. You didn't just describe these elements, you inhaled them daily and exhaled them as literary truth. Imagine yourself strolling through the corridors of the imperial palace now, just as Murasaki did, her senses acutely aware of every detail. The sheer aesthetic richness of the environment was overwhelming in the best possible way. The palace wasn't just a dwelling, it was a constantly evolving, breathing work of art, and the courtiers inhabiting it were the most exquisite living sculptures performing their roles in a silent drama of elegance and nuance. The most striking visual element, perhaps, was the fashion. You remember those junihito, the 12-layered kimonos worn by aristocratic ladies? They weren't just clothing, they were statements. The subtle combination of colors known as kasan no irome involved precise shades often named after natural phenomena like willow green or plum blossom layered on snow, each combination signifying season, mood, or status. The slightly different length of each inner sleeve, revealing a spectrum of harmonized colors at the cuff, was the height of elegance and refinement. To have a perfectly chosen, perfectly coordinated junihito ensemble meant you were aesthetically literate, socially adept, and had absolutely excellent taste, or at least a superb personal dresser. This level of sartorial detail made its way straight into Genji, where characters' emotional states are often subtly telegraphed by the specific shades of their layered robes, allowing Murasaki to create profound character moments out of mere clothing choices. A shift in a sleeve's shade could hint at a lover's true intentions, or a woman's despair. It was the original reading the room via haute couture. Mainstream historical fact: Heian nobles, both male and female, had their social interactions heavily mediated by screens, fans, and elaborate veils. Women in particular often remained hidden behind multiple layers of screens when speaking to men, or even to less intimate female acquaintances, revealing only a sliver of their face, or simply allowing their elegantly cascading hair and the hems of their layered robes to indicate their presence and social standing. This indirectness emphasized voice literary skill and aesthetic taste over direct physical appearance, paradoxically giving fashion and the act of writing letters, and thus stationery and calligraphy, an even greater significance. Imagine having to make a dazzling first impression from behind a beaded curtain. The role of art music and poetry, which were as fundamental as breathing in Heian court, saturated Genji. The musical scenes featuring the mournful strains of the koto, or the bright melody of a flute, reflect the reality of courtly entertainment and individual artistic pursuits. Characters exchange not just witty repartee, but intricately crafted poems, these waka forming the core of their romantic and social communication. Your meticulous ear for cadence and your innate skill at waka, honed since childhood, allowed you to compose these within Genji with such seamless artistry that they feel utterly authentic to the character and the moment, serving as plot points, character development, and emotional shorthand. You are seeing the actual instruments you listened to, the exact poetry you critiqued, translated into vivid fictional reality. And the smells. Remember those exquisite personal perfumes nobles created from rare woods and spices? These aromatic elements filled Heian life, defining space and presence. A particular fragrance clinging to a discarded love letter or trailing behind a departing noble could speak volumes. Murasaki imbues Genji with this sensory richness, the scent of her sleeve becoming a recurring motif for memory, longing, and identity. This is why, even when Genji and his ladies are apart, the world of Genji still resonates with multi-sensory beauty. The feel of fine silk, the taste of spring water, the scent of evening air, the sound of the wind, the sight of a perfect blossom, immersing the reader entirely. Here's a light joke. Trying to figure out someone's emotional state in Heian court life, based on their layered silks and poem about a dewdrop, was essentially trying to read complex nonverbal riddles every waking moment. Forget therapy, you just needed a very, very skilled interpreter of silent anguish via kimono cuff. Yes, their lavender trim subtly implying a renewed hope after profound melancholic longing, or maybe they just ran out of dye. It adds a certain challenge to dramatic misunderstandings. Even the physical setting, the residences with their sliding screens, expansive gardens, and meticulously tended nature, shaped Genji's world. The shifting seasons and their inherent no-aware, the beautiful aching awareness of impermanence, are almost characters themselves. The fleeting beauty of cherry blossoms, the somber hues of autumn, leaves, the silent falling of snow. These natural rhythms, meticulously observed by you, were woven throughout the narrative, mirroring characters' inner lives and shaping their actions. The weather in Genji is rarely just weather. It's a profound metaphor, often reflecting inner turmoil or quiet resignation. One quirky tidbit: the Heian period was particularly keen on spirit possession, as a genuine explanation for illness, madness, or inexplicable misfortunes. Noblewomen were particularly susceptible to possessing spirits, mononoke, often caused by the intense jealousy or anger of others. Priests or exorcists would be brought in to perform elaborate rituals to cast out the possessing spirit. This real-world belief or pervasive social convention found its way into Genji, notably in some of the darker plotlines surrounding Genji's relationships, adding a layer of supernatural realism to the already rich psychological drama, underscoring anxieties about uncontrollable emotions and karmic retribution. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's unparalleled skill at embedding such specific detailed elements of Heian culture so seamlessly into her fictional narrative reflects her commitment to a meticulously accurate historical portrayal, or if she was rather creating an idealized, aesthetically refined version of Heian court that served as a backdrop for universal themes with cultural elements acting more as symbols than strictly literal documentation. Was it documentary fiction or fantastical culturalism? The beauty is perhaps that it's both at different turns, allowing the reader to enjoy its vivid details while also plumbing its emotional depths. The very air of aristocratic Heian-kyo, its emphasis on refined taste miyabi, its celebration of ephemeral beauty, and its nuanced understanding of social interplay became the essential breathing elements of your novel. The tale of Genji doesn't just tell you what life was like, it immerses you so completely that you feel it. The rustle of silk, the faint scent of incense, the delicate strains of a koto, the weight of a perfectly composed poem. This immersive quality is precisely because Murasaki wasn't creating from imagination alone. She was synthesizing a lived, experienced reality one observed in quiet contemplation, and then artistically transmuted. Every artistic detail, every elegant ritual she chronicled sprang directly from the peaceful yet intricately formal world that she herself inhabited in the Emperor's palace. Her peaceful Heian existence allowed for such meticulous, nuanced observations to be fully embodied within her epic. She saw the true magic not in grand battles or dramatic upheavals, but in the smallest, most exquisite details of everyday aristocratic life. You've become fully immersed in how Heian culture, down to the last elegant silk hem, became the vibrant backdrop for your literary work. But within that highly cultivated court, you weren't the only brilliant writer. The Heian period, particularly Empress Shoshi's court, was a veritable hothouse of female literary talent. And yet for Murasaki, her place among these sisters was often a nuanced, quiet one, marked more by intellectual distinction than by overt camaraderie or fierce literary competition. Imagine the atmosphere now. You're moving through the corridors of Empress Shoshi's apartments, likely exchanging polite greetings with other talented ladies-in-waiting, many of whom were accomplished poets, diarists, and storytellers themselves. This era was unique. Women traditionally excluded from high public office and formal Chinese scholarship turned their energies to Japanese vernacular prose, creating an explosion of personal diaries, Nikki Bungaku, and long narrative tales monogatari that documented their inner lives and observed their society with unparalleled detail. Mainstream historical fact: alongside Murasaki Shikibu, the Heian court nurtured other literary giants. The most famous is Sei Shonagon, author of The Pillow Book, a witty, insightful, and often playfully acerbic collection of observations, lists anecdotes and opinions, which chronicles the court of a rival empress, Fujiwara no Teishi. There were also Izumi Shikibu, known for her passionate love poetry, and Akazome Emon, celebrated for her historical chronicles and personal collection of verses. It was like having a writer's colony where everyone dressed impeccably and wrote on perfumed paper, making every tea party an unspoken literary critique. The idea of a literary sisterhood among them is perhaps more aspirational for us looking back than it was a direct reality. While they might have admired each other's talents, the court was also a place of subtle rivalries and jockeying for patronage and favor. Murasaki, by her own account in her diary, was a naturally shy and introverted person, not given to the open social games or quick-witted verbal sparring that some of her contemporaries, particularly Sei Shonagon, famously excelled at. Imagine having to make small talk at a party, while also feeling obliged to compose spontaneous haikus to acknowledge someone's new silk scarf. It would be exhausting even for the most seasoned extrovert. Murasaki often seemed to operate within her own internal world, focused on her burgeoning novel and her duties to the Empress, rather than seeking out alliances or participating actively in literary circles. She might have read the work of other women writers and privately admired their skill, but her character wasn't one to openly praise or engage in casual, familiar exchanges. There is little direct evidence of a warm, supportive writers' group, as we might envision one today, sharing tips over kombucha lattes and discussing character arcs. More likely, exchanges were formal, intellectual, and perhaps tinged with polite distance. She herself expresses in her diary a certain intellectual modesty, perhaps a strategic one, about her deeper knowledge of Chinese. This is due to the societal constraints where women were discouraged from openly displaying such learning lest they be seen as prowess of Chinese, something often considered unbecomingly academic. She may have felt, too, that the direct, often highly subjective and occasionally critical style of writers like, say, Shanagan, who delighted in enumerating things that irritate one, was antithetical to her own more empathetic and contemplative approach to human experience. A light joke she probably thought, say, Shanagan was just being a bit much, with all her lists and public declarations of taste. Oh, the pillow book, so witty, yes, very opinionated. My poor nuanced characters would just weep at such blunt observations. This quiet internal distance isn't necessarily a negative. For Murasaki, it allowed her to cultivate a truly unique literary voice, undisturbed by the dictates of popular opinion, or the pressure to engage in the fleeting literary fashions of the court. While other women explored the direct autobiographical narrative or compiled charming anecdotes, Murasaki was building an entire fictional universe with intricate plots and psychologically complex characters over decades. She wasn't capturing fleeting moments or cataloging preferences, she was plumbing the depths of the human soul. One quirky tidbit, because paper was so precious, and reading materials were primarily hand-copied, receiving a personal original copy of someone's poetry collection or sections of an emerging narrative like Genji was an immense honor and a sign of profound esteem. It's almost certain that Murasaki's writing was shared in this manner, fostering an exclusive readership, and perhaps despite her reserved nature, sparking admiration from afar, leading to indirect literary exchanges. Imagine receiving an intricately folded scented scroll containing an early chapter of a groundbreaking novel, a secret gift from its author, and you immediately know this is something culturally revolutionary. It bypassed the formal gatherings to make an impact one silent reader at a time. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's occasional negative remarks in her diary about contemporary female writers, such as her dismissal of people who go about parading their knowledge, are primarily expressions of personal shyness, intellectual humility, a calculated display of conformity to courtly gender norms, or genuine criticisms of literary styles she considered superficial or less profound than her own. It's tough to discern true sentiment from strategically curated presentation when every word is part of an exquisite social performance. This mystery, though, underscores her quiet place among her peers. She rarely positioned herself for direct confrontation or casual comparison. Despite the numerous accomplished female writers at court, Murasaki cultivated her specific quiet place, not through deliberate exclusion, but through the singular ambition of her creative vision and her inherent introspective nature. While other writers may have played the witty court intellectual or engaged in vibrant competitive poetic duels, Murasaki seems to have kept her main focus squarely on her novel, on the meticulously crafted emotional realism that only she seemed capable of. Her interaction with other literary figures seems to have been more about respectful observation than active participation, reflecting her broader life of discerning awareness. Her existence in Empress Shoshi's service gave her access to the world of female literati, the energy of a vibrant intellectual salon, but paradoxically solidified her own distinct and unique contribution within it. She didn't seek the limelight or literary battles. Her genius lay in a profound stillness, a gentle persistence, that allowed her to absorb and then reconstruct an entire world in unprecedented detail. Her peace wasn't just physical quiet, but an intellectual tranquility, allowing her to stand apart, observing, composing, and weaving the enduring narrative that defined her quiet but powerful legacy, all the while existing harmoniously among, and yet distinctly from, her equally gifted sisters. The palace provided her with literary community, even if she rarely chose to fully merge with its public currents. You've witnessed the serene yet distinct space Murasaki cultivated for herself amidst a vibrant literary court. Now let's take that exquisite novel, The Tale of Genji, and dive deep into what truly makes it eternal. Murasaki Shikibu's profound, almost unsettlingly modern reflections on truth, illusion, and the unyielding complexities of human nature, all meticulously woven into her rich prose. You see, she wasn't just telling a story. She was conducting a 1,000-year psychological experiment. Imagine for a moment you are the architect of this vast, fictional universe. What truth would you portray? Not just the mundane details of daily court life, though you certainly capture those with startling clarity. No, Murasaki's truth is deeper, the psychological truth of the human heart, its motivations, its frailties, its eternal longing. She portrays characters not as caricatures, but as intricate beings riddled with internal contradictions, their surface elegance often masking deep vulnerability or concealed desires. Genji, the Shining Prince, is presented as an embodiment of grace and perfection, yet his pursuit of women often brings profound unhappiness to himself and others. That's a stark truth. Mainstream historical fact. The tale of Genji is frequently cited as remarkable for its deep psychological realism, depicting internal monologues, complex motivations, and character development over many decades and across generations. This was a radical departure from earlier Monogatari tales that often focused more on events' heroic deeds or idealized types. Murasaki shifted the focus from external action to the intricate landscape of the inner mind, paving the way for later psychological novels worldwide. She effectively said, "Forget the sword fights. Let's talk about the anguish of a mismatched sock that reflects your entire life's failures. And what of illusion Heian court life you understand was steeped in it. The meticulously crafted appearances, the indirect communications through poems, screens, and carefully chosen scents, the subtle avoidance of direct emotional expression, all serve to create a grand, pervasive illusion of harmony and refinement." Murasaki doesn't merely expose this illusion, she dissects it. She shows how characters cling to illusions about themselves, about their loves, about their control over fate. The illusion of eternal beauty, tragically fading. The illusion of unrequited love, finally blooming only to bring new sorrows. The illusion of status, bringing happiness. You realize through her narrative that Heian life, with all its aesthetic perfection, could be a kind of beautiful self-imposed emotional prison. A light joke here, Prince Genji's constant pursuit of love interests, sometimes marrying them off into side palaces, while still pursuing others, paints a picture of a protagonist desperately trying to find the one, while concurrently creating the many to also maybe be the ones. He's basically a sophisticated, aesthetically refined serial swiper who thought elegant poetry could solve commitment issues. Alas, my heart is as a broken lute, beloved. My only solution, 3 more concubines for polyphonic solace. Murasaki explores the human nature part with surgical precision. Vanity is omnipresent. The meticulous attention to appearance, the concern with reputation, the silent competition over artistic skill or poetic retort. But beneath that vanity lies profound loneliness. Her characters, surrounded by attendants and courtiers, frequently suffer in exquisite solitude, unable to truly express their deepest feelings due to societal constraint, honor, or misplaced pride. She unveils the enduring human desires for connection, acceptance, and love which relentlessly collide with societal norms' duty and the painful reality of impermanence mono. No aware which, by the way, was not a quirky fringe thing for Murasaki. It was a pervasive, fundamental philosophical truth about human experience that colored everything in her world. It's the aching awareness that everything beautiful will eventually fade. Think about the novel's core concept of karma and attachment, though the Buddhist themes become more explicit in later chapters, particularly in the Uji chapters. Characters are seemingly cursed, or experience tragic outcomes that appear to stem from past actions or karmic repercussions. Murasaki explores how desires, especially powerful romantic attachments, can lead to suffering, and how human choices ripple across generations, often unconsciously impacting the lives of their children and grandchildren. This isn't presented didactically, but rather seamlessly woven into the intricate lives of her characters. It reflects the pervasive Buddhist philosophy of the Heian era that colored every philosophical conversation. It suggests a vast, inescapable truth beneath the refined surface of human life. This emphasis on truth, illusion, and human nature stems directly from her own journey. Her childhood was defined by absorbing forbidden knowledge, those Chinese classics that revealed historical patterns and philosophical depths which allowed her to see past the superficialities. Her period of domestic peace and motherhood honed her observations on intimate relationships. Her entry into court then provided her with a constant living laboratory, where the interplay of human ego, desire, and illusion was enacted daily on a grand stage. Her experience as a highly discerning observer in a largely indirect society trained her to read between the lines, not just of a poem, but of an entire life. Here's a quirky tidbit about the gaze. In Heian literature, there was a very strong tradition of veiled communication, meaning direct gazes were rare. Instead, glances through openings in screens or between layers of kimonos, the trailing scent of a sleeve or the rustle of robes became the truthful signals of attraction, disdain, or curiosity. Murasaki often writes of Genji peeking through gaps in screens to observe women, turning these discrete moments of observation into potent instances of psychological revelation, hinting at the hidden lives women led. So in a world where everyone literally obscured themselves behind curtains, the few glimpses, both visual and psychological, became incredibly potent moments of truth. She built her novel on these subtle moments of seeing through the carefully constructed facade. Another light joke? Imagine living in Murasaki's world and someone complimenting your new outfit but subtly referencing how it's too bold, almost daring for such a subdued season. You'd spend the rest of the day in exquisite existential torment, wondering if you just publicly declared yourself aesthetically incompetent. Or imagine if Twitter existed, everyone would be writing elaborate poems to shade their enemies, then replying to their own tweets, pretending it was a friendly exchange, with absolutely no one being fooled. Because the internet wasn't actually that different. The human need to impress, complain, or passively aggressively lament a slight isn't exactly new. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's nuanced exploration of characters' internal states, their struggles with truth versus illusion, and the inevitable flaws of human nature, points towards a form of subtle social commentary or critique of Heian aristocratic values, or if it was simply a natural outgrowth of her profound empathetic insight into universal human experience. Did she set out to dismantle the polished surface of court life, or simply found its cracks to be the most fertile ground for exploration? It's part of her enduring genius that Genji can be read on both levels, providing a fascinating debate that will likely never be definitively resolved. Her prose often mirrors her theme of elegant complex truth. It's lengthy, often meandering, eschewing simplistic plot lines for detailed unfolding psychological journeys. The story isn't just about events. It's about the emotional residue of those events, the lasting impact on character. She takes simple incidents and layers them with moral complexity, philosophical implications, and the ever-present understanding that life is beautiful, precisely because it is fleeting, full of yearning, and endlessly perplexing. So, in the tale of Genji Murasaki, Shikibu, from her peaceful observation points first within her scholarly home and later within the elegant palace, constructed not just a narrative, but a profound human mirror. She showed us that behind the silk, the poetry, and the impeccable manners, human beings wrestled with the same truths and illusions that define us today. The search for love, the pain of loss, the struggle for identity, and the universal craving for meaning. Her art wasn't just to tell you what happened in Heian, Japan. It was to reveal through meticulously crafted words the deep, sometimes uncomfortable, enduring truth of why humans endlessly create, dream, suffer, and love. It was a narrative testament to her unique, calm perspective on the inherent bittersweetness of existence itself. You've just peered into the profound psychological landscapes Murasaki painted within the tale of Genji, plumbing the depths of human nature, illusion, and truth. And as you emerge from those literary realms, you're reminded that your peaceful palace life, the wellspring of this genius, wasn't an isolated creative chamber. It was a crucible of female intellect. You were one star in a constellation of extraordinary women, all writing, observing, and creating. Yet Murasaki's presence among these brilliant sisters at court was distinct, marked by her own quiet dignity, unique literary ambition, and perhaps a healthy dose of intellectual reserve. Imagine standing amidst them now, surrounded by the rustle of exquisite kimonos and the scent of personal perfumes. These women were not just attendants. They were active participants in a literary golden age, where a lady's wit, her poetic skill, and her ability to capture the nuances of human experience on paper were as highly prized as beauty or lineage. Their writings, primarily in the vernacular Japanese script of kana, gave voice to an entire side of Heian culture, largely absent from the official male-dominated Chinese histories. They shared themes of love loss, aesthetic beauty, and the profound sadness of impermanence, mono-no-aware, which seems to have been a collective poetic muse for everyone in that court. Mainstream historical fact. The Heian period is extraordinary in literary history for the sheer volume and quality of its vernacular literature authored by women. While Chinese was the language of government law and formal history, Japanese kana was considered suitable for women's writing, leading to an explosion of diaries, Nikki-bungaku poetry collections, shikashu, and long narrative tales, monogatari. This societal division inadvertently fostered a remarkably rich literary environment for aristocratic women, granting them a unique platform to document their subjective experiences and shape literary traditions. Essentially, because men considered it frivolous, women quietly invented the novel and many other foundational genres of Japanese literature. Of course, the most prominent comparison for Murasaki was Sei Shonagon, who served a rival empress, Fujiwara no Teishi Shoshi's predecessor and aunt, but whose vibrant pillow book undoubtedly circulated perhaps furtively within Shoshi's court. While Sei Shonagon is celebrated for her sharp wit, sparkling anecdotes, and definitive lists, things that make the heart beat faster, Things that seem boring at first but then become exciting. Murasaki, by her own account, seems to have been less keen on direct social engagement and more on quiet introspection. Sei Shonagon was a fireworks display of witty observation, while Murasaki was a profound, subtly shifting landscape. She's the kind of person who'd politely listen to Sei Shonagon describe hateful things, then subtly incorporate them into a character's deep, quiet, existential dread. Murasaki herself in her diary famously reflects on other women writers with a reserved, sometimes even critical tone. She criticizes those who parade their knowledge of Chinese classics, even though she herself was deeply learned in them. This wasn't necessarily jealousy, but possibly a combination of her genuine shyness and adherence to the societal expectation that women not overtly display academic prowess, and perhaps a subtle disapproval of literary styles she deemed less profound or less nuanced than her own burgeoning vision for Genji. You can almost hear her gentle internal eye roll. Oh, a list of annoying things one's neighbor does. Fascinating. Now let us return to the deep-seated generational karma of illicit love affairs and the pervasive, beautiful melancholy of existence itself. This inherent reserve meant that her sisterhood wasn't necessarily one of coffeehouse camaraderie. Instead, it was more likely a quiet acknowledgement of shared talent, a mutual, sometimes unspoken critique, and a respectful distance maintained through carefully crafted communication. These ladies likely shared their literary works, perhaps had them copied and circulated, and recognized each other's brilliance, but within the rigid frameworks of courtly propriety. Imagine the tension in a book club meeting where every member is also a published author and passive aggression is an art form. One light joke, any attempt to establish a ladies' literary club, would have immediately devolved into a competitive poem-off to determine who could express the most subtle regret over the choice of teacup. While other talented women like Izumi Shikibu, a poet of passionate and often sorrowful love, and Akazome Amon, a narrative poet and chronicler focused on diaries, waka collections, or more traditional monogatari Murasaki, plunged into the novel form. Her chosen path required a unique discipline and an immense sustained creative effort that differed significantly from the more episodic or thematic works of her peers. She wasn't simply composing delightful literary vignettes. She was building an entire interconnected world spanning decades. This focus set her apart, creating a distinct creative bubble, even within a buzzing intellectual salon. A quirky tidbit here related to literary borrowing and inspiration in Heian literary circles. While overt plagiarism was frowned upon, discreet imitation and respectful allusion to popular texts were common and even seen as marks of cultural sophistication. Sometimes a specific turn of phrase from a contemporary's work or a popular tale might quietly find its way into another's. This fluid literary landscape where handwritten copies of tales were exchanged and subtly reshaped by different scribes, sometimes by adding or removing poetry, or even adding entirely new episodes, means that literary influence was a constant, almost collaborative process even without direct personal friendship. Murasaki's mastery would have enabled her to seamlessly integrate, reinterpret, and elevate drawing on the cultural currents around her, even as she herself shaped them. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of explicit warm literary mentorships or close friendships between Murasaki and her celebrated female contemporaries indicates a competitive court environment that inhibited true collaborative literary sisterhood, or if it simply reflects Murasaki's natural introversion and single-minded dedication to her unique artistic vision that naturally distanced her from direct engagement. Was it a conscious decision to stand apart, or simply the natural byproduct of a distinct genius? Whatever the case, it makes her monumental achievement all the more singular, crafted largely in a deeply internal process, perhaps not by accident, but as a condition of its unique scope and insight. Her peaceful and productive existence within Empress Shoshi's court allowed her the ideal vantage point from which to observe the dynamics of these accomplished women. She was witnessing literary creativity in its various forms, even if she rarely directly participated in overt intellectual debates. Her unique talent and focus carved out a particular place for her, not at the head of a boisterous literary club, but rather as the quiet, deeply perceptive engine behind an unparalleled, all-encompassing narrative. Another light joke. She probably wasn't the kind of person who'd participate in literary battles like some other court women. She was just writing the epic novel that would subtly critique everyone's life choices and emotional mismanagement, long after the immediate poetic squabble was forgotten. The ultimate long game. So Murasaki Shikibu existed within a literary constellation of powerful, gifted women, each carving out her own space with pen and ink. Her unique contribution was less about how she directly interacted with her peers, and more about how she quietly synthesized all the currents of Heian life, the art, the etiquette, the desires, the sorrow, and the very act of writing into an enduring monument of prose that transcended the limitations of her own quiet and nuanced social position. She observed the court she wrote from its heart, and in doing so gently but irrevocably changed the landscape of world literature, while politely declining most party invitations. You've gently floated through the constellations of brilliant women, discerning Murasaki's unique quietude among them, a distinct creative bubble in the humming court. Now pull your focus close to her desk, her brush, and her magnificent literary feat. Let's unspool not just what she wrote, but how she wrote it. Murasaki Shikibu's profound, perhaps unsettlingly prescient reflections on truth illusion and the unyielding complexities of human nature, all meticulously woven into the sprawling, vibrant tapestry of the tale of Genji. You see, you were doing more than writing a story. You were inventing an entirely new way of seeing, of revealing, and of understanding. Imagine her narrative voice now. It's not loud or declarative. It doesn't tell you simply this happened and then that happened. Instead, your prose is a flowing, almost hypnotic river carrying the reader through intricate eddies of emotion, subtle shifts in perspective, and meandering internal monologues. This deliberate pace, these sustained observations allowed you to depict truth in a manner unprecedented for your time. The truth here isn't historical fact or a moral lesson spelled out. It's the psychological truth. It's the truth of unspoken desires that torment characters, the quiet despair hidden behind impeccable smiles, the tangled mess of mixed motivations that drives seemingly virtuous acts. You reveal, for instance, how Prince Genji, the paragon of Heian beauty and aristocratic charm, capable of inspiring fervent love and loyalty, simultaneously harbors profound emotional insecurities, and at times engages in ethically dubious actions, causing immense suffering to others. His outward brilliance is often an illusion that conceals his deep, persistent melancholy. This layering of light and shadow, the unveiling of vulnerability beneath the polished exterior, is your masterful exploration of core human realities. Mainstream historical fact. One of the most significant aspects of the tale of Genji is its innovative use of sustained character development and interiority. Unlike earlier narratives where characters often served as archetypes or static figures in an episodic plot, Murasaki's protagonists evolve, learn, make mistakes, and experience the full spectrum of human emotions over decades, some even across multiple generations within the novel's vast scope. This meticulous charting of psychological progression set Genji apart, effectively inventing the modern concept of the novel, where character rather than pure plot is paramount. Imagine reading a whole book where everyone's constantly evolving, learning painful life lessons, and never quite achieving true happiness. Talk about deep. The Heian court was a world steeped in illusion, a meticulously constructed edifice of refined manners, aesthetic perfection, and rigid social roles. You, with your discerning eye, peel back these layers of illusion with astonishing grace. You show how outward elegance can conceal moral compromises, how the illusion of endless youthful beauty eventually gives way to the painful truth of aging and loss, a central theme often rendered with heartbreaking poignancy. Your narrative constantly contrasts the dazzling superficiality of court life with the deep, often bittersweet reality of individual human experience. Characters might live in grand palaces exchanging perfect poems, but your prose exposes the quiet yearning for true connection, the despair of unrequited love, and the emptiness that can come from living a life dictated entirely by appearances and social expectation. It's a grand dance where everyone performs perfectly, but your art reveals the dancer's aching feet and tired smile. One light joke here. If you, Murasaki, were to create a modern reality TV show based on the Heian court, the ratings would soar. Imagine the episode where the beautiful noblewoman meticulously prepares her outfit and composes a seemingly innocent waka, but your brilliant internal monologue reveals she's secretly planning to orchestrate a scandal, seduce her rival's distant cousin, and blame it on an auspicious moon phase. You'd caption it, "Just living my best aesthetic life, blessed be this seasonal angst." The external illusion would clash so spectacularly with the hidden truth, audiences wouldn't know what hit them. And then there's human nature. Your novel is a relentless yet empathetic study of its eternal patterns. You explore the nuances of romantic entanglement, the fleeting ecstasy, the lingering regret, the quiet dignity of renunciation, the destructive power of obsessive jealousy, hello Lady Rokujo, and the bittersweet wisdom gained through enduring sorrow. You show human ambition, pride, vanity, and the subtle, often unconscious cruelty that privileged characters inflict. But you also portray profound compassion, enduring loyalty, and the delicate moments of understanding and connection that flicker like candles in the darkness. There's no simplistic good or evil. Only endlessly complex people trying to navigate an equally complex world, often failing, occasionally succeeding, and always fascinating. Your characters, from emperors to humble servants, grapple with universal questions of identity, purpose, desire, and the fleeting nature of happiness. It's like a grand, elegant, extremely well-dressed existential crisis drawn across multiple generations. Your artistry and storytelling extended beyond mere plot. The Heian court's concept of mono, aware that profound and melancholic sensitivity to the impermanence of all things beautiful, saturates your prose. This isn't just a quirky tidbit for literary analysis, it's an emotional current that binds the entire narrative. The fading blossom, the rustle of autumn leaves, the fleeting glance of a lost lover, each becomes a moment of profound recognition of life's transience. This pervasive melancholy acts as a truth that cuts through all illusion, constantly reminding characters and readers of life's ultimate bittersweetness. It elevates personal grief or passing moments into universal reflections. It's like hearing the world sigh around you, gently acknowledging its fleeting nature, and you putting that sigh directly into a character's heartbreaking internal monologue. Here's a quirky detail of Murasaki's actual writing process and its reflection on illusion. Scholars believe Murasaki worked on different parts of Genji simultaneously, possibly writing certain later chapters while still drafting earlier ones, or expanding on parts based on reader feedback from circulated sections. This means the story was not always conceived in perfect chronological order, but rather evolved, was rewritten, and expanded. This unstable text aspect might parallel the very fluidity of truth and illusion within the story. What's real in one moment, what's a fact, might shift or be revealed in a different light, later reflecting the multi-layered process of its creation. You yourself were literally weaving and reweaving the narrative, demonstrating that truth itself can be a shifting construct even on the page. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's emphasis on the illusory nature of worldly pleasure and the inherent suffering caused by attachment is a deliberate espousal of specific Buddhist doctrines, or if it reflects a more universal humanism shaped by her lived experience and contemplative nature. Was she a quiet religious philosopher, teaching through fiction, or an empathetic artist, merely mirroring life's inherent sorrows? This open scholarly debate further emphasizes the multifaceted brilliance of your approach. The narrative offers no easy answers, but instead invites profound reflection, reflecting the quiet complexity that you embraced. In essence, your art of storytelling wasn't about delivering neat conclusions or heroic triumphs. It was about depicting the continuous, subtle interplay between what appears to be true and what actually is, what people show the world, and what they hide within what society expects, and what the human heart truly yearns for. You understood that a life, even a peaceful Heian life of utmost refinement, is fundamentally a journey through layers of truth and illusion powered by the endlessly complex and often contradictory force of human nature. You allowed your readers century after century to gently slip into the silk-lined skin of your characters, experiencing their dilemmas as their own, subtly discovering profound truths, not through lectures, but through deeply lived fictional lives. Your lasting legacy isn't just a story. It's a profound literary act of psychological illumination carefully rendered over countless pages by the serene brush of a genius. You've intimately grasped how Murasaki's art of storytelling deftly peeled back layers of truth and illusion in human nature. Now let's pivot from your deeply contemplative creation to its quiet reverberations within the court itself. Because while you, Murasaki, were tirelessly weaving this intricate narrative, your magnum opus, The Tale of Genji, was not locked away. Instead, it was circulating slowly, quietly, but with immense impact, gaining a subtle, deep admiration within the very sophisticated circles you inhabited, transforming literary taste without a single fanfare. Imagine, if you will, the anticipation that hummed faintly in Empress Shoshi's apartments. Perhaps a newly finished chapter of Genji would be painstakingly copied by a swift-handed scribe, because remember, there were no printing presses back then. Each copy was a meticulously crafted artwork in itself. These freshly penned scrolls, possibly dyed a delicate hue, and subtly perfumed, would then begin their discreet journey past from one privileged noblewoman to another, from Empress Shoshi herself, down through her trusted ladies-in-waiting, and eventually to select male courtiers who sought both aesthetic pleasure and literary insight. This wasn't mass media. This was the ultimate exclusive sneak peek, like getting a signed advance copy of the year's most anticipated multi-generational psychological drama delivered to your personal mailbox, except the mailbox was another person who just whispered, "Have you read the latest part?" Mainstream historical fact. While there was no publishing industry as we know it, patron figures like Fujiwara no Michinaga actively facilitated the copying and dissemination of the Tale of Genji chapters within the court, effectively acting as your de facto publisher. His goal was not commercial gain, but to elevate Empress Shoshi's court as a center of unparalleled cultural sophistication and artistic brilliance. This quiet endorsement from the most powerful man in the realm gave the nascent novel an undeniable gravitas, making it mandatory reading for anyone who truly wanted to consider themselves culturally literate. So you might have written in private, but your patron made sure your work would gently penetrate the innermost circles of power and influence. The reception was by Heian standards rapturous, but always in a dignified, understated way. No one would scream in excitement or start a fan account. Instead, courtiers would offer highly refined praise. They'd speak of your mono no, aware that profound aesthetic sensitivity to impermanence as particularly poignant. They would debate the complex motivations of Prince Genji, comparing him perhaps to historical figures they knew, though never, heaven forbid, explicitly. Conversations even during courtly banquets might subtly revolve around the unfolding fate of your characters, adding a new complex layer to the daily courtly gossip. Imagine knowing the intimate lives of fictional characters better than your actual cousins. Because unlike your cousins, their dramatic emotional states were elegantly written out for all to discreetly consume. A light joke here. Perhaps the biggest controversy would have been when someone argued whether Prince Genji's decision to choose that particular shade of violet for his concubine's robes was a profound symbol of his spiritual decline, or just an unfortunate laundry day. Literary analysis was intense in Heian, Japan, and if you suffered writer's block, the solution probably involved sending a discreet poem to the Empress, implying a gentle inability to progress due to a mysterious ailment of the brush hand, leaving the courtiers desperate for the next chapter. The polite agony of waiting for your next literary fix. The impact of the Tale of Genji grew subtly yet powerfully. It set a new literary standard for Japanese narrative. No longer were simple anecdotes or direct chronicles sufficient. Your novel demonstrated the profound power of psychological realism, character development across generations, and the immersive potential of a multi-chaptered fictional world. It redefined what monogatari tales could be, subtly pushing future writers towards greater depth and complexity. Your quiet writing created a literary seismic shift. Your contemporaries might still write their poetic collections or diaries, but Genji became the silent benchmark, the mountain they knew they could only hope to approximate. This period was also one of particular literary competition between the courts of the different empresses supported by Michinaga. While Sei Shonagun's Pillow Book had delighted Empress Teishi's court with its wit and vibrancy, Genji offered something entirely different for Empress Shoshi, a more introspective, psychologically profound, and expansive vision of life. Your book effectively became a soft power weapon, proving the unparalleled cultural sophistication of Shoshi's household, and by extension, Michinaga's astute patronage. So, your gentle prose served inadvertently as a cornerstone of courtly prestige, a quieter kind of battle won on the fields of aesthetic refinement. One quirky tidbit about this quiet reception, since all copies were handwritten and frequently by court ladies themselves as part of their training or duties, it's highly probable that some early editions of Genji might have subtle variations, unique annotations, or even minor changes or poetic additions made by the scribes. These could be small deviations based on transcription errors or deliberate flourishes that, unknowingly to the original author, shaped how specific passages were perceived. Imagine your masterpiece slowly, subtly gaining multiple slight variations over centuries, each one becoming a unique, precious artifact. It's like a handwritten, choose-your-own adventure that everyone implicitly agrees to years after you've written it. This fluid manuscript culture speaks to the deeply personal and organic way literature lived and breathed in that era. Historians still argue whether Murasaki personally intended the tale of Genji to circulate widely, even in its incomplete state, or if its spread was largely initiated by her powerful patron Michinaga, for his own strategic purposes, merely exploiting your unique talent. Was your contribution passive reception or quiet collaboration? Was the immediate admiration at court as widespread as the later reverence? Or did its full impact take time to germinate even within its target audience? Regardless, it quickly cemented your reputation as a literary genius of unparalleled skill, though you with characteristic quietude may not have reveled in the explicit praise. You simply observed the subtle changes in conversation, the hushed references, and the polite inquiries about when the next chapter might be ready for careful perusal, please, and thank you. You didn't become a celebrity in the modern sense. There were no public readings or book tours. Your acknowledgement came in quiet courtesies and heightened respect from your peers in the subtle ways the book influenced subsequent conversations and new literary creations. You witnessed the quiet triumph of your work, the way it moved individuals, and how it subtly shifted the very aesthetic and intellectual fabric of the court around you. This serene impact, the gradual, almost imperceptible transformation of a literary world, was arguably far more powerful and enduring than any momentary fanfare. You just kept writing meticulously and patiently, while the world you portrayed began to hum with the quiet echo of your timeless narrative. The peaceful existence of your time at court was now giving way to the peaceful yet enduring quiet revolution of Genji. You felt the quiet ripples of the tale of Genji expanding through the court, your work achieving a subtle yet profound impact without needing a fanfare. Now, as the seasons gracefully shifted and years gentle and unhurried added themselves to the tapestry of your life, we enter Murasaki Shikibu's later years. These weren't years of grand drama or public recognition tours. They were years of deeper contemplation, a serene embracing of the wisdom garnered from your observations, and a quiet, dignified surrender to the unfolding of life and the subtle embrace of your emerging literary legacy. Imagine your rhythms now subtly different from the vibrant court life. The exact date and circumstances of Murasaki's departure from court service to Empress Shoshi are like many details of your life shrouded in the gentle mist of history. It's not clear if you retired, if Empress Shoshi died before you she actually did in 1026, though some records imply your death earlier, or if your duties simply phased out over time as your daughter Daini no Sanmi also embarked on her own life, perhaps even beginning her own service at court. What is clear, however, is a gradual return to a more secluded contemplative existence. This was likely a voluntary re-embrace of the peaceful life you cultivated in your earlier years, a quiet withdrawal from the constant demands of palace decorum. This era was likely spent largely within your family residence, or perhaps within the precincts of a Buddhist temple. Mainstream historical fact. It was a common practice for aristocratic women in their later years to take Buddhist vows, sometimes formally entering a convent, or simply living a life of spiritual devotion, often shaving their heads, adopting monastic names, though not necessarily celibate, particularly if still actively engaged in the secular world. This was seen as a dignified and spiritually meritorious way to prepare for the afterlife, and to process the transient nature of worldly existence, allowing for a deeper philosophical immersion. While we don't have definitive proof, you formally took vows a return to introspective Buddhist-informed contemplation is entirely consistent with your worldview. You're settling into your profound wisdom, accepting the passage of time. Your days might now revolve around devotional practices, the gentle chanting of sutras, careful calligraphy perhaps still of excerpts from your own work or Buddhist texts, and gazing at your tranquil garden, not for social commentary, but for profound personal reflection on the ephemeral beauty of existence. The quiet hum of cicadas in summer, the delicate sound of falling leaves in autumn, these became your symphony of aging. This retreat wasn't about escape. It was about immersion, a deepening of your already profound understanding of Mono, aware that gentle melancholy of fleeting beauty, and a quiet reconciliation with the great cycles of life and death. You were finding comfort in the rhythm of being. One light joke here. If modern retirees went for Buddhist contemplation like Hay and Noble's Instagram feeds would be full of expertly filtered photos of shaved heads, serene smiles, and elegantly arranged stone gardens captioned, "Living my best Zen life # enlightenment goals." Though yours, Murasaki, would probably be captioned, "Still subtly critiquing the societal illusions of material wealth, but in silence now as a hobby." Your legacy, of course, continued to grow quietly in these later years. Even if you were no longer at the very center of the imperial court, the tale of Genji was continuing its circulation, its renown steadily increasing. Your subtle insights, the detailed characters and the elegant language resonated more deeply as the years went by, recognized as something timeless. This slow, almost organic growth of your literary standing meant you could witness the beginnings of your immortality from a gentle, peaceful distance, rather than being swept up in the often exhausting tide of fame. It's the rare artist who gets to appreciate their future classic becoming just that, all while being free from the pressure to produce a sequel or a dramatic public appearance. A quiet reflection might be had about your own relationships and loves from earlier in your life. The nuanced emotions explored in Genji Love Loss, longing, the pain of attachment, would perhaps take on new shades of meaning as you entered your senior years, colored by memory and a profound sense of universal human experience. There might be a peaceful reconciliation with past joys and sorrows, seeing them not as sharp wounds, but as threads contributing to the beautiful complex tapestry of a life well lived and deeply observed. You were living the themes of your own magnum opus. Here's a quirky tidbit about later years in Heian noble society. Longevity was valued, but true old age, like reaching one's 70s or 80s, was fairly rare among the general population due to limited medical knowledge. So simply living to a venerable age was itself a mark of wisdom and good fortune, often celebrated as a rare blessing from the Buddhas or various kami spirits. This meant that the peaceful passage of your later years would have been seen not just as personal fulfillment, but as a kind of sacred achievement, reinforcing the idea of a life lived harmoniously within the natural order. It wasn't about staying young forever. It was about embracing the graceful wisdom of the autumn of life. Historians still argue whether Murasaki in her later years deliberately curtailed her writing after the tale of Genji to pursue spiritual practices and deeper philosophical contemplation, or if existing records are simply too sparse to account for continued, but perhaps more private literary endeavors beyond the great novel. Was your intellectual journey superseded by a spiritual one, or did they continue in peaceful parallel paths? It's hard to definitively say, but the enduring narrative we have clearly culminates as an expression of her multifaceted genius. You didn't just end a story. You chose to live its highest ideals. Your peaceful contemplative wisdom, nurtured in your father's library, refined in your domestic life, and sharpened by your time at court, now came full circle. The beauty of the passing seasons, the subtle light filtering through paper screens, the quiet murmur of prayers, the wisdom in every leaf falling from the ancient plum tree, these were your companions. You didn't chase after fame. You simply embodied a gentle brilliance that created a lasting peace, a literary and philosophical legacy that echoed silently but powerfully across centuries. You had lived your life not by dramatic turns or thunderous pronouncements, but through gentle, meticulous observation and the creation of something beautiful and profoundly true. The peace you found was not an absence of thought or feeling, but a deep presence within it, a quiet understanding of impermanence, a serene acceptance of human folly and aspiration, and a dignified embracing of your own quiet legacy. You became in your later years an embodiment of the serene wisdom your work imparts, a peaceful, dignified presence that still inspires and profoundly shapes the world, all from the quiet confines of your ancient, beautiful home in the land of the rising sun. You had woven your masterpiece, lived a rich, observing life, and now simply allowed the tapestry of your existence to slowly, gracefully complete its silent design. You've accompanied Murasaki Shikibu through her later years, sensing the gentle cadence of contemplation, the serene embrace of a life richly observed and gracefully lived. Now let's bring your journey full circle. Her departure from the court and from life itself sometime in the early 11th century, around 1014 to 1025 CE. Its exact date, like so many personal details elegantly obscured by the mists of time, was not an ending to her story. It was merely a quiet transition into a timeless realm, a continuation of her peaceful presence through her monumental creation. The tale of Genji and its author Murasaki Shikibu continue to echo through the centuries, their murmurs carrying an immortal wisdom that belies the serene, understated nature of her own existence. Imagine the centuries unfolding after her passing. The palace changed hands. New empresses rose and fell, political intrigues simmered, but your great narrative, painstakingly copied and meticulously read, did not fade. Instead, it blossomed further. The tale of Genji wasn't just a popular story. It became a foundational text of Japanese literature and culture, its themes, characters, and stylistic innovations permeating everything that came after it. Future writers, poets, and scholars revered it not just for its beauty, but for its profound understanding of human experience. You had, through your gentle pen, created something that became a guiding light, a standard and eternal muse. Mainstream historical fact. The tale of Genji influenced centuries of Japanese art, drama, poetry, and literature. Artists created Genji pictures or scrolls depicting famous scenes. Poets composed verses in response to its emotional passages. It shaped aesthetic ideals and character archetypes for countless generations, and its study became essential for classical scholars. It transcended its origins as a courtly tale to become an undeniable pillar of Japanese cultural identity, much like Shakespeare for English literature, but with even more kimonos. It wasn't just a book. It was an entire aesthetic and emotional philosophy wrapped in prose. Your influence rippled out in tangible ways. Think of all the artists who picked up brushes inspired by your descriptions of courtly elegance, creating scrolls vibrant with color depicting scenes of Genji and his ladies in meticulously rendered gardens. Consider the No and Kabuki playwrights who drew upon your narratives for their own dramatic interpretations, bringing your characters to life on stage, echoing the profound emotional dilemmas and bittersweet karmic patterns you so eloquently wove into the text. Your influence isn't just felt in literary critiques. It's a living presence across Japan's cultural heritage, still informing storytelling today. You're everywhere just quietly. The scholarly debates continue, a testament to the layers of complexity you embedded. Historians still argue about the true nature of Genji's character. Was he an idealized hero, a flawed anti-hero, or a profound study of karmic repercussions? Was his portrayal a subtle critique of the Fujiwara patriarchy, or a celebration of aristocratic ideals? This ongoing scholarly debate is a vital sign of your text's enduring vitality, refusing to be pigeonholed or confined to a single interpretation. You gifted the world a literary masterpiece, but also a millennia-long academic discussion point that gives future scholars something to do on quiet weekends. It's truly a genius-level passive contribution. And beyond scholarship, think of the individual lives Genji continues to touch. It's translated into countless languages, introducing new generations across the globe to the delicate beauty and psychological depth of Heian Japan. People in busy modern cities living lives completely different from yours still find resonance in the themes of love loss, impermanence, and the search for meaning that your work explores. You created something universally human out of a uniquely specific world, showing that despite 1,000 years and radically different lifestyles, human hearts beat with the same yearnings and sorrows. You proved that while society changes, people really don't. A light joke. People still make bad romantic choices and get ghosted. They just don't send their heartbreak poem on perfumed silk to your gate and await a similarly delicate reply for days. They just hit block. Much less dramatic, honestly. Your serene life, your tranquil rhythms, the profound patience that allowed you to observe and craft this epic work over so many years. This all echoes in the lasting qualities of the tale of Genji. It's not a book that assaults you with drama. It gently envelops you. Its prose is often flowing, reflective, inviting contemplation, mirroring the quiet pace of your own life and the gentle world of Heian-kyo. This calmness, far from making it forgettable, made it timeless. It allows readers to truly absorb its subtle details and profound emotional wisdom, creating an immersive experience that endures. Your spirit is in every page, a quirky tidbit that demonstrates this enduring influence even today, centuries after your passing. New translations or modernizations of the tale of Genji continue to be produced, some reimagining its themes or adapting its narratives for contemporary audiences in unexpected ways. This active engagement with your text, not just as a static historical artifact, but as a living, adaptable source, further confirms its unparalleled ongoing cultural relevance. People aren't just studying it, they're remixing it, ensuring its spirit continues to live on in new forms. It's like being a rock star who released one masterpiece album and then just gently faded into obscurity, only for thousands of artists centuries later to be still covering your songs and putting their own spin on them. Your unique position, a woman writer in a highly stratified patriarchal society, deeply learned yet often constrained by societal expectations, imbues your work with a particular authenticity and resonance for many readers today. You gave voice to the inner lives of women in a period where such perspectives were rare, exploring their ambitions, their suffering, and their joys with unmatched empathy. This made Genji not just a tale of court life, but a profound and timeless feminist document, quietly asserting the rich internal world and emotional complexities of women within rigid social structures. You are the original voice of 1,000 quiet aspirations. Another light joke. The enduring impact of the tale of Genji probably gave subsequent generations of aristocratic children impossible standards for dating. But Mother, his poetry is not as poignant as Genji's. His scent lacks proper depth, and his layered kimonos are simply acceptable. The expectations became simply stratospheric because of your masterpiece. Your very silence on many aspects of your private life, the peaceful quality of your obscurity, paradoxically enhances your legendary status. It allows Murasaki Shikibu to become a figure of profound intellectual power and artistic mystery, untainted by petty gossip or explicit historical conflicts. You are known for what you created, not for any scandalous drama or political machinations. It's a different kind of immortality born from the deep well of your mind, rather than the transient currents of power or fleeting fame. You lived your quiet life, you wrote your monumental truth, and in doing so, you carved out an eternal echoing presence that defines the very core of Japanese aesthetics and literary history. And so here we end our journey not with a crescendo, but with the quiet murmur of eternal influence. You Murasaki Shikibu taught us that the greatest impacts can stem from the quietest observations, that the most profound wisdom often emerges from serene contemplation, and that a single exquisitely written story, born from a life lived peacefully and deeply, can truly echo across millennia. Your world, once so vividly alive beneath your pen, remains an immortal murmuring presence, quietly shaping understanding, still enchanting and enlightening us one timeless chapter at a time. The ultimate lasting legacy written in stillness, read through the gentle rustle of 1,000 years of quiet contemplation. As the final words of Lady Murasaki's story softly dissipate into the night air, feel yourself gently floating down, settling into your own comfortable space. The grand corridors of Heian-kyo and the rustle of silken robes now fade into memory, becoming quiet, shimmering pictures in your mind. All those elegant dilemmas, the exquisite poems, the long, serene journeys through life and love, now come to a gentle pause. Take a slow, deep breath, letting the imagery softly drift away. The long, beautiful night stretches before you, filled with quiet dreams. Reassurance is in the air. You've made it through another extraordinary tale held in the timeless current of history, gently led by a mind as peaceful as it was brilliant. Close your eyes, let your thoughts unwind, and find that serene stillness deep within. Sweet dreams, my friends.